Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto was raised by devils in Highschool DxD part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. October 10th. October 10 for the people of Konogaku no Sado, or for shortening Konoha, it's a reminder of two things. Victory over a great enemy, the Kyuubi no Kitsune, and the loss of a leader, a hero. The Yondaime Hokage. At the Demuon. A civilian shouted as he ran after a boy, looking somewhat tall for his age, but also significantly emaciated. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. They stopped near the ending of a dark alleyway. "Why me, what did I?" stuttered Naruto, obviously scared of the gathering of villagers in front of him. "You fucking demon, our families, our friends, you killed so many of them, and you dare ask it?" growled the civilian, with far more scorn than you would see in an adult when addressing a kid. He helplessly looked at the mob with teary eyes in a corner, praying for something good to happen. But it should be obvious by now. Such a huge mob in such an enclosed space. Things were not looking good. "But I didn't do anything," whimpered Naruto, miraculously still able to speak. The villager heeded none of his words and proceeded to kick the miserable-looking child without remorse. "Yeah, right. Big, fat tears to fool everyone, right? How creative of you. Too bad we are a bit more insightful than that." And as soon as that was said, punch after punch, kick after kick, slash after slash of small knives, and the impact of countless rocks. All these things suddenly ceased as an Anbu operative manifested out of thin air. "What's this commotion all about?" coldly said the Anbu. The crowd began to grow scared. The Sandaime was quite the demon lover, but of course, they wouldn't say that out loud. If word of this got to the Sandaime, they could end up being punished, they could end up being tortured, they could end up being Anbu-san, said a random one among the crowd. "What a coincidence to find you patrolling this area. Normally, this isn't the kind of place people such as you." His voice trailed off as the other villagers' minds thought about other things. Yes. The others thought. It certainly was unnatural, their quietness and the tone of voice with which that random man suddenly tried to talk to him, as his nervousness was palpable to even them, normal citizens, but they could still fool him if they did it right. The distaste against the damned beast was seriously high, as should have been obvious, but the Sandaime still kept it with protecting this curse from the gods. If they were found in such a situation, things wouldn't end pretty for them, to say the least. But of course, such thoughts were mere delusions. If a special Anbu operative was someone that mere villagers could fool, they wouldn't have ever gotten their rank. "What's going on in here?" The Anbu's head tilted slightly to the side, throwing a quizzical look at the back of the alley. Many of the villagers had already moved to block the blonde from view, and one was shutting his mouth forcibly. Yeah. What's happening indeed? "You fucking idiot," thought the villagers. Well, you see, the man tried to keep himself from letting his gaze wander or his eyes from avoiding eye contact. He was failing spectacularly. "Well, you see, you still haven't cut his vocal cords?" bluntly asked the Anbu. The Anbu suddenly advanced slowly forward. The stunned villagers didn't impede his path, and even the ones grouped like a pack and blocking the kid from outside view moved out of his way without a second thought. Naruto seemed way past the point of even properly squirming or trying to escape them by brute force. The villagers were scared. What was this? Was it possible? Was it real? Was it a trap? Did the Sandaime finally get aggressive and set up people like this to confuse and apprehend them? But what if it was Ray? The villagers' musings were silenced with the sound of metal meeting flesh. All their eyes focused in amazement as one small but agile-looking blade traced an arc in the air, an arc tainted red midway through its flight. There was blood alright, but somehow the blonde kid wasn't drowning on it. Done. Now things become exceedingly easier. "So, shall we proceed?" questioned the Anbu, shocking the villagers out of their stupor. "If we take any longer, we will be found out." The Anbu heaved a sigh like he found interacting with the mob troublesome. The villagers, finally semi-awake, advanced towards the boy. Maybe they were too lucky, maybe it was a trap, but this was too good, God forbid if they missed such a chance. "Save me, save me, save me, save me, save me," again and again, he endlessly repeated. From the moment he had realized their trickery after they talked to him in front of Tucci's place, to the moment everything seemed so close to ending, he only repeated one thing, that sole thing, over and over again. Who would have thought there would be a response? Unknown location. Strange mused aloud a certain redid clad in golden dark armor. "Grafia, did you feel that surge of energy? Yeah, wait," said alarmedly the white silver-haired woman, outfitted with a maid uniform, standing in the left side of the redid. "Sirzechs-sama, this energy frequency is but, shouldn't this be before she could end?" Sirzechs raised his hand, silencing her. "Grafia, get ready, we're going. I doubt this is what we really think it may be. But, just in case." Sirzechs tightened his fist. Grafia, for a moment, looked sadly in his direction for whatever reason. Even if she was the head maid at the moment and not his wife, she felt compelled to comfort him if even just a bit. But every second was precious, it couldn't be wasted like this. Not losing even one more moment, Grafia left to get things ready, leaving a deceivingly angry Sirzechs to wait in his throne, looking out to God knows where. Hiruzen, we may need to discuss quite a few things. I hope that this feeling is a mistake, muttered the super devil angrily at no one in particular. Kushina, same moment, different place. Light of deepest red, for even the red in one's blood couldn't hope to compare to this display of beautiful crimson. Like it was suddenly splashed by the blood of thousands, a red that would make rubies cry in shame flooded the alleyway. A figure of imposing image, an aura that left one short of breath, the air that accompanied royalty, and a gaze that pierced like an estoc that struck true through the soul. His crimson hair was beautiful to an alarming level, and his face, like a sculpted statue, was breathtaking. Clothes weren't what adorned his body, but black armor with gold accents. The regality of it was palpable, and the stranger's atmosphere attuned far too well to it. A strange woman of silvery silky hair, enchanting face that gripped at one's instincts like horny animals, and sensual body that drew eyes as easily as if breathing, appeared like it was natural at his side. Her eyes were as piercing as his, the burning tension of looking through them was none, and only a weary cold could be felt, like a blizzard. It could be understood that the redid at her side was wearing some strange design of armor, but her clothing sense escaped everyone's knowledge there if they had been concentrating on her clothes, or even on her at all. Scanning his surroundings with apparently zero care for those that stood in front of him in surprise, the redid's gaze stopped promptly as it reached a nameless blonde laying bruised and bleeding on the ground. The very cold eye looked at the mob of villagers and the Anbu, the latter one all of a sudden looking extremely tense. Did you do this? His voice was cutting like a knife, and even when it was said like a mutter, everyone heard it as clear as an evening day. Why yeah. What about it? This stupid demon, everything would be better if he just. A nameless villager quietly fainted and fell to the ground. Everybody there gasped all of a sudden, and that black-armored stranger gaze didn't die down for even a second. Grafia. Understood, Sirzechs-sama. The foreign woman kneeled to the ground, and her graceful-looking arms clasped the small kid with tender care and gentleness. The wound on his throat was obvious and alarming, but wasn't fatal enough that required immediate care. Taking her time, she examined the body thoroughly. The wave of fear was beginning to be washed over, and the increasingly tenser villagers took some threatening steps forward, more likely than not relying on the small advantage of numerical superiority to try and overwhelm him. The one on the back, with a strange mask and obvious gear that befitted a soldier or a special unit member, had been the only one to become aware of just how bad an idea that was, Sirzechs realized. Before the tense situation exploded, a warm light that felt comforting even to the faraway villagers swept over the alley, exuding from the strange woman's hands. Her hands glowed with visible light, and as they caressed his body slowly and carefully, the wounds closed up and the bruises disappeared. She reached the neck which still bled quite deep, but found her charge squirming and resisting even in his weakened state. He had tried to resist her almost unconsciously and only had his effort abated when she began healing his beat-up body. The moment those same healing hands washed over his neck, he started all over again. Whether he had more energy left than she thought, or his now mostly healed body afforded him the luxury of exerting more of his strength, he writhed about stronger than before. Sirzechs-sama, heal only the necessary. We'll deal with the rest later. Only the necessary, Sirzechs-sama, his vocal cho. I'm aware. Nonetheless, proceed the same regardless. As you command. Hey, what exactly are you doing? This doesn't concern you, strangers. Attend to your own business. Sirzechs' gaze seemed to keep them all at bay still, but he knew these people were irritated enough that the fear they felt would only make them feel cornered, pushing them towards some stupid decision. Sirzechs-sama. The tone in Grafia's voice caught his attention enough that his sight centered on her, disregarding the crowd he was keeping in a leash, but all those straight thoughts dispersed as he saw the sight before his eyes. He could hear but didn't even recognize the gasps that everybody heard from the back. Spiky blonde hair that may have taken someone's eyes out with correct aim was replaced by silky, smooth red hair with vibrancy and brilliance, like a most beautiful rose, taking in the totality of the sun's light. A marred and uncared-for skin still dirtied with mud suddenly gained a smooth texture, and even through the unhealthy color of pale skin due to malnutrition, someone with a keen eye would see the texture of the skin was far better than all the women present, except maybe the one currently caring for him. His half-open eyes, only somewhat aware of whatever was happening around, were still blue, but adopted a deeper and heavier shade of blue that radiated with some inhuman mystique, enrapturing everyone around without trouble. They may have been hunting him with reckless abandon and unquenchable and unreasonable hate just moments prior, but none of the villagers had the proper defenses to last against this unexpected attack. There was one that recovered fast enough though. The Anbu, with their training beaten into their heads, realized instinctively this was the best chance he ever had at ending this before it got nastier. Something told him not to look directly at the demon, as whatever change affected him transcurred, and he confirmed his intuition had paid off when a glimpse of the image was enough to shock his senses, but for an instant. One way or the other, his eyes would be drawn in, and his ability to properly think robbed off of him momentarily. At this moment, at this instant, he was the strongest one who had his full attention concentrated on his task, eliminating those two. They frightened him. He could only shiver. Seeing the redid and the silver-haired woman, thinking of getting caught and having to deal with a Biki, suddenly sounded way better for whatever unexplainable reason, but he still advanced forward. 10 meters. 5 meters. 2 meters. Elmos, shut up. A merciless hand grabbed an unsuspecting face. Wah, my nephew doesn't feel too well at the moment, all thanks to the hospitality of you and your people. The Anbu's masked horse face was pulled closer as the foreigner looked him dead in the eyes. Please, do let me give some of it back to you if you do not object to it. With a mighty swipe and most likely some aiming, Sirzechs threw the offending ninja at unprecedented speeds towards the whole of the villagers still stupefied by Naruto's appearance. More than 5 went flying at varying angles, and more than a dozen got easily tumbled over like bowling pins. The deed was done. And now there was something else to do. Sarutobi, come here. You must know I'm simply not on the best of moods, so please at least appear in front of me like it's due. None of the villagers had been knocked out by the previous collision with the Anbu going at terminal speed, so when Sirzechs said so with clear tone like the sandame was one step away, their hurting bodies jerked up instantly. As promised, some light footsteps could be heard. Looking back, the silhouette of a single old man, slightly hunched over and with a grave expression on his face, guarded by 2 ninjas who kept at his close side, approached more and more. Someone decided he wanted to look up for some undetermined reason, and the 2 sides of the alleyway were filled with Anbu at the tops. Arrest them. The sandame said without a second thought as he approached the villagers. They obviously wouldn't and didn't take this well, but Hiruzen wasn't paying them the slightest attention. He stopped in his way to the red head near where horse was still half unconscious from the concussion. Hiruzen looked at him with an appraising eye and more than a fair bit of disappointment before telling the other Anbu to get him sent to a Biki at once. He would deal with horse later. Sarutobi stopped a few feet in front of the redid and his gaze was filled with both anxiousness and apprehension. Sirzechs didn't even spare him some pity as his gaze was still as piercing. Let's go to the Hokage Tower. Sarutobi finally managed to say as he turned around towards the alleyway's exit. There's much to talk about and this isn't the best place. Hokage's Tower. Hiruzen, I'm clearly aware of what kind of man are you and understand that this situation must have exceptional circumstances. That being the case, please begin explaining. Sirzechs and sadly, I can only say that these circumstances are mostly the results of exceptionally bad luck. Bad luck? You remember we had that as means of communication, right? If I do remember, you said back in the day that your side had begun some small side projects, one of those was dimensional interference, was it? Ah, that's right. Mumbled Sirzechs as he remembrances about those days. Yeah, I do think I sort of explained how my world mostly works, all those years ago. You at least remember a piece of it, right? Well, the dimensional gap, I do believe I mentioned it, it's the gap between the 3 worlds where we habit. Well, I sadly don't remember all the specific and little details, but there was a sudden movement in favor of a better understanding of the workings of the area. I think it was started by some of the elder devils using their influence because the fallen angels had started some devious research concerning it. Sirzechs sighed somewhat tiredly. And they understand the burden that a youngster like me has to suffer for their unnecessary paranoia. I had to cancel a special date I had planned with Grafia. Sirzechs-sama, such comments are unnecessary. You youngster? I certainly remember your light-heartedness, Sirzechs-san, but I never took you for a comedian. Sarutobi lighted his pipe and took some puffs of smoke, knowing this conversation wasn't over and wanting to grab something that could calm him a bit better. I recall something about meeting something. You never quite wanted to talk about the incident. Sirzechs grabbed his head as he groaned. Nobody wants to remember such a bad headache. Sarutobi puffed some smoke as he gave Sirzechs a weird look. That's so? Then I will not pursue further. After whatever happened to your side, some kind of incident saw your sister ending stranded on our side. Whatever happened on your side that caused said incident also was the cause that you had some kind of breakthrough and became capable of interdimensional travel, at least to our world. By that time, a couple of months had passed. Minato had met Kushina well, I don't think I need to get detailed what happened after. What's your point, Hiruzen? You left me the means for communication with your side. Mine had never dwelled on this subject and I had made it very explicit I didn't want anything related to such research except for what you left me for connecting with you. There are some desperately ambitious individuals in your side that you just didn't want to meddle with such things, right? I may still not given up full hope on Danzo, but his presence is certainly a liability and I dread thinking what may he throw himself and the village into if he got his hands on such technology. But that's not the point, but rather what happened to the equipment itself. You should be aware I'm not knowledgeable enough of the basic theory to know what was it that went wrong. Whatever it may have been, it ended up unusable. My best estimation is that the incident with the Kyuubi was the cause. It happened around that time. And around that time, Sirzechs looked to the floor in contemplation. That had been when he had become aware that his only sister at the time had been killed. The only thing he had been able to do was send a message to Hiruzen about being aware of the situation, but not being able to go to his world. Actually, in the developmental department of dimensional phenomena detection, classification and intervention, the proper and obviously larger name for it, all clans from the surviving 72 were investing a bit on it. There was the official research that everyone was a part of, and then the actual research. Individually carried out by each clan, maybe 2 or 3 or 10 alliances here and there, but it was fundamentally individual. Everybody knew that if Beelzebub decided to participate, each and every one of their efforts would have been wasted. Strangely, he kept himself clear of the project as a whole, seemingly not interested. Regardless, what happened in the past is the past, but the main point was that Grimory found itself alone in this whole affair. They didn't have any kind of real desire for more power or influence, you could say it was mostly as a hobby, so when whatever was it that had happened and he appeared, showing them the correct way to go to other dimensions like he was playing a game or just having a good time, the Grimory made an effort in hiding their findings and results, understanding what would happen if such findings became public knowledge to the Elder Demon Society. Of course, his appearance had been a few months after the first incident when Kushina inexplicably found herself sucked towards some unspecified location after they screwed something up. It was only a few months after that he made contact, when Sirzechs and his family were close to deciding to treat Kushina either dead or at best lost forever. After all the disaster in the Ninja Country, the details of which will not be touched upon, and Kushina's decision to stay with Minato, not much time passed before tragedy struck and they got information on Kushina's death. Mr. and Miss Grimory were still affectionate parents, so even they wanted some way to be aware of Kushina's condition. Again he had decided to stay for an undetermined quantity of time in their care, and after helping them with Kushina and now this, they were indebted to him anyway. He also seemed to have had some reason to be in their world, and before long they got news on the baby. The family was utterly surprised such a quick conceiving was possible for a demon. The happiness didn't last after the Kyuubi's incident. Kyuubi, a 9-tailed kitsune, a kind of yakai. This being was completely different on a number of ways from the normal kitsune yakai, and even its power was obviously greater from the small information Hei had collected. But the demon world had gotten quite turbulent during those times, and there was quite a bit of stress between the Mayus and the Elder Devils, mainly the Elder of the House of Baal, the first head of the house, Zekrom Baal. He wielded as much influence, if not more than the 4 current Satans combined. There was, or rather still is, a period of rather tense stress between his fellows demons and the current government, but Sirzechs understood this was all too common. And I was being kept on everyone, by everyone. If Sirzechs tried to make any kind of leave, no matter how short, he knew someone would notice and cause tremendous repercussions, worse if they learned the implications of his absence, or how he escaped in the first place. This lasted for various years, for demons with their average lifespan of various thousands of years view time differently. With time, he developed countermeasures to do transport without rousing suspicion, the tensions had softened remarkably, and his uninterrupted work during all this time had earned him a write-up for some needed repose, and he was given the green light to go off and relax whenever he felt like it. But considering how long it had been, that no message had been sent back, and that Sirzechs honestly didn't feel the least inclined to visit his sisters, brother-in-laws and nephews' tombstones, made it so he had never decided to visit the dimension again. He planned to go eventually and visit his sister as was due, but he wasn't ready. Then this happened. The wave of energy that he recalled far too well drove him to nostalgia, hope, and a very strange form of despair. And what he found was less than optimal. Apparently his sister's kid had survived the ordeal in some way, his present state was depressing to put it nicely. Hiruzen had just been kind enough to remember to mention said fox had been sealed in the boy by Minato himself and was positively maddeningly enraged at his present condition, and the kicker was that all may have been avoided had the damn communicator not broken down. Calm down, Sirzechs-san. I understand how you must feel, Sarutobi hastily said as he saw the redid exhale with weariness in his face. And I can quite understand what you're gonna propose. Surely, my ability to care for Naruto was a total laugh, Hiruzen said as he eyed the other occupied chair in his office, where Graphia, the beautiful silver-haired woman garbed in maid clothing, cared for the unconscious Naruto. The scene filled the old man with happiness, but also made him feel sharp guilt. And the fact that trying to vouch for Naruto would only have spurred the civilian side of the council into ill-advised decisions and Danzo to take a more active role in the chaos is not an excuse enough. If I had tried harder, things could have been much better. I was even forced to hide his real appearance with a specialized seal arrangement, trying to not make him grab attention even more. Sadly, don't blame yourself so much, Hiruzen. After seeing that mob, their expressions, the tone of their voices, it was clear as day. This kid wouldn't be even alive if it wasn't for you. The destruction of the communication equipment wasn't anything you could have controlled, and he's my nephew, not yours, not anybody's in this village. If I ever asked you to go as far as putting him over all the people under you, I'd be nothing but a hypocrite. You did more than you were expected to do, and for that I thank you. Sarutobi heard the words loud and clear, but his hands, clasping one another, didn't soften their grip for even one moment. Sarutobi's head hung low for a short while, contemplating something. Just about when Sirzechs thought it may have been a good idea to advance the conversation, Sarutobi spoke again. I have a favor I'd like to ask you, Sirzechs-san. Aha, Sirzechs raised a puzzled eyebrow. Could you also take 3 other people with you? I have my reasons, Sarutobi explained immediately. As he did, he took some documents out of his drawer after searching for a little, saying things like good thing I had them at hand nearby. He passed them to Sirzechs, who began reading them. They are in very precarious situations. Talk of a possible coup d'etat has been spreading like fire. Of course, it's not just talk. One of our clans, the Uchiha, have become very vocal about their perceived difference of treatment and how they have been shunted to the side as whole from the village. A number of incidents and the increasing tension have made it so it has stopped being rumors and has become a possible reality. One of the Uchiha, directly under my command and strongly opposed to the affair as a whole, Itachi Uchiha, has been providing me necessary information while acting as a double spy. However, due to his status as a genius and the eldest son of the clan leader, slandering, insults and bad rumors have been circulating about him. It's not shown on the surface, but public resentment against his presence and that of his family has been steadily increasing, and his social alienation has not helped the case. The other, Anko Mitarashi, is the former disciple of a student of mine, Orochimaru. He ended up amassing quite a bit of enmity before promptly defecting the village. His discarded disciple, has been constantly seen with eyes of mistrust and glared at with stares full of resentment as backtalk about her being a possible spy for Orochimaru escalated more and more. After years, things have obviously calmed down, but I'm beginning to deeply worry how such an environment may affect her in the long run. She's a good girl, and I like to help her out. The last one, Hyuga Yuzuki, is a highly introverted girl. Because of that, even considering the nature of Anbu, she has had problems to fit in properly in any of the official teams, causing bad synergy. The 2 she frequents the most is the one led by Kakashi Haddock, whom she personally idolizes, and a hybrid team composed of her, Anko and Itachi. Her increasingly loner attitude has caused a bit of a problem, and for reasons I have failed to understand, many of the higher-ups within the civilians and some of the higher-ranked of our own ninja have requested her for a number of high-profile missions, some quite over what her rank or level of ability should let her. Their excuses are her good sensorial abilities, also putting the pretext it'll serve as future training, but that's all lies. They are just the kind of sick person that takes pleasure on seeing someone like her struggle. Hyuga has a difficulty with expressiveness, and even if she shows vivid expressions, it's most likely a lie to cover herself, so these people indulge themselves on the struggles and pain she has to go through under the circumstances, like shattering lots of ice to try and see the gem underneath. Her looks most likely worsen the situation. Yet you cannot do anything about them, Sirzechs thought out loud. So then, there's something that keeps them safe. Either the excuse of training and accumulating experience gives a free pass to any maltreatment they impose on her, as long as they don't go out of hand, or, I think you meant and, Hiruzen added with a look of pessimism. Their mission scores are superb. Hyuga capabilities are certainly a thing to praise, and in the hands of experienced veterans, they can draw out her usability to the fullest. We got nothing to grab them by the collar for, and they get the results that would be necessary to bury things like their treatment of her. What I don't quite understand is what all these individuals have to do with Kushina, said Sirzechs as he analyzed the files. Anko Mitarashi was under the so-called Orochimaru till about 2 months after her Chunin exam at 11 years old. By that point, Hyuga Yuzuki is only 9 years old and coming out of the academy with honors for graduating at such an age. Uchiha Itachi is barely 5 years old by this point and only 2 months away from his 6th birthday. I don't see how. Kushina was a ninja of Jounin level in our ranks. That year she was supposed to serve the purpose of Jounin instructor, just like Minato, but as you can see that same year is when she got pregnant, around maybe January or February, and was taken back from duty for maternal leave. Of course, things turned ironic. In a set of events that I would not rather describe right now, Kushina ended up drawing a group to herself. Those were the abandoned Anko, the already socially awkward Hyuga, and the still young Itachi that somehow felt comfortable with her. After all, your sister and his mother were best friends. I wasn't aware of that. Tons of things happened, so I don't fault you. Anyway, through Kushina as their pillar, the three kids connected and with her at the center became really close. They also even interacted with Minato and his team, some of the reason Hyuga admires Kakashi so much. It was an odd group, but maybe it was just her maternal instincts kicking in. Makoto Uchiha wasn't a bad mother by any measure, but for the Itachi that abhorred war even from young, the household where his father was had too much pressure for him. But of course, you should know what happened after. Kyuubi. Yeah, that fox. As you can imagine, with her death, their pillar was gone and the death itself was shocking enough. However, 5 years later, this very same year around some 2 months ago, young Itachi joined Anbu at 11. He really is a child prodigy. They don't look to be just chosen from wherever. Besides the fact he was so unpleasant that one with the horse mask actually didn't let himself get distracted by Naruto and went straight for us. I think he even realized how truly dangerous we were. Anko entered around 2 years later when she was 13. Her abilities were remarkable, Orochimaru made sure of that, but that wasn't the main point or reason. She was to show her actions instead of words to get trust again. In other words, a cute dog doing tricks as it's told and wagging its tail obediently. Hyuga entered around when she was 11, mostly for her sensory abilities, rather than her general aptitude like Itachi. That she followed orders like a robot, it's something that influenced the decision, I'm sure. So they meet again, more or less. Itachi was more than you could ask for, but he was a pacifist at heart that was dissatisfied with his life, but nobody understood that, thinking his genius made him isolate himself, whether he wanted or not. Anko had excellent abilities, but her personality killed that off. She did the missions and got the objectives so that nobody would complain. And Hyuga is kind of on the predicament I told you about, not counting her original social and emotional problems. So the Monosol team balances them out. At least as far as making them work a bit better than they usually do. More or less. With attention for the coup d'etat and a bunch of other smaller but still troublesome matters, I sincerely wouldn't want them anywhere nearby. Hiruzen, I understand fully what you are implying, but you must be aware. When I say I'm taking Naruto, I'm fully intending on having him come back someday. My sister still decided to live her life here. Until Naruto grows to the point where he is able to consciously choose what he wants himself and then give him the benefit of the choice, he stays with me. This means, as I'm sure you understand, his stay will be everything except short. His condition as a Jinchuriki will certainly make this difficult and I'm still gonna go forward with this, but those kids aren't in a position to. Oh, I'm fully aware of that, Sirzechs-san. These youngsters, they have a bright future ahead of themselves, very bright indeed. But this place is far too clouded and my body too aged and my influence waning too much to properly do the necessary things without incurring more losses or affecting the whole of the village. There's quite a bit more that I would love to help and quite a lot of stuff I would like to make right, but I have neither the power nor the means to even properly carry it out. I have found a way on you and I would never question a man of your caliber on your ability to handle something like this. These kids are far more than soldiers, to more people and to me too. I'm not asking you to fix a broken weapon, but look after a foolish child that would rather sprain his knee and keep shut for whatever reason instead of crying and asking for help like any child should. This place isn't the place for it. And as promising as they are, if someone like I, once called God of Shinobi, couldn't control my own village on my own just because they leave, I should have never gotten this hat in the first place. As Sarutobi lightly tapped the white with adornments of red hat on his balding head, Sirzech's face went serious with real consideration. After easily 20 minutes like that, he reached a conclusion. I'll accept your request, Sandame. Sirzech said with a resolute expression. The old man's expression softened appreciably and he sucked on his pipe more relaxedly. That's so. That makes me really happy. To tell you the truth, they are the main reason Naruto is still alive and not this shameless old bat. They kept most pests at bay or informed me whenever things got past a certain point or it wasn't the usual unruly mob. They even sometimes left him food, but in such way it looked like it had been thrown away or forgotten, as they knew very well the paranoid mind he had developed over the years. For some reason, he had been off guard on the day and the mob had used some personal information to trick him into a bad position. Anyway, I'm sure they'd be delighted. Though I wonder about Itachi, considering his mom and his younger brother. We will see how it goes. Sirzech afforded one smile for the old man. This is their choice on the end, no much we can do about that. If we can calm things on the village, it would be easier, but before he could continue further, a knock at the door interrupted them. Who is it? I'm occupied at the moment. Hokage said in an authoritative tone. It's us, Hokage-sama. Anbu Team U, reporting after our successful mission on Kusa. His eyes widened in surprise. You. I see, perfect. Immediately enter please, we have to discuss some things. The doors immediately opened and so 3 individuals entered the room. A crow-masked boy, black-haired and sporting a very small ponytail. He was the smallest, but just looking at him made Sirzech's understand he wasn't normal or standard. A somewhat taller woman with a snake mask and purple hair and a pineapple bum, holding her hair. From her very posture, you could see hints at her laxness or relatively rebel attitude. If Sirzechs were to guess, the last one with the cat mask should have been 2 years younger than Anko, but her height was almost the same. Other than that, her long and straight hair with a different hue of purple drew attention, but not as much as the stiffness of her stance. This is good. Team Yu, this is Sirzechs-san. A special guest. Actually, I was telling you about him just now, as I have an assignment for you which is very related to him. This surprised the three individuals before they exchanged stares. Apparently all thinking the same thing, the small boy was the one to actually talk. An assignment with this foreigner? We do not understand fully, Hokage-sama. Would you care to explain in greater detail? As he talked with calm and collected voice, Sirzechs noted something with his eyes. Through the eye hole of his mask, clearer than he would have thought, shone a lone blood-red orb marked by 3 black tomo. This should be interesting. After the discussion with Team Yu, Hokage-sama, what was the reason for calling all of us for this sudden meeting? I ain't exactly on the best of moods. A female voice, barely so, growled like an irritated animal on an annoyed tone. Whenever are you on a good mood these days? I heard the Choza. As the feral woman barked back, the robust Akamichi groaned under his breath. Could you keep it down? Nobody here is exactly on a good mood for whatever reason, and your yelling isn't making it any better, Tsum. Put a collar on all that savage. An annoyed voice said in protest, but in a more weary tone that contrasted the fiery one from the female. The last comment hadn't been received very well. I mean, geez. My troublesome wife and troublesome son already give me enough hell. What, did your daughter insult your femininity again after one of your quarrels didn't end well? Nara absent-mindedly commented that while cleaning his ear with his finger, more interested in the latter activity than the former. The sudden silence and the receding killing intent made his curiosity overcome that sixth-like sense of his that detected troublesome things and decide to spare Tsum a look. The woman had her head hanging down and her shoulders were trembling. Her face, or rather her expression, looked incredibly softer, even though it was filled with either shame or embarrassment, neither a feeling anybody there was sure she was capable of feeling. There were minuscule tears at the borders of her eyes. Boy, are you serious? Is something so troublesome really affecting you? Well, if you keep that look on it may work, you look quite like a frail maiden. Maybe a bit of makeup, some nice dresses, maybe also. Shut your goddamn trap, Shikaku. Tsum roared in rage. The Nara had begun chuckling mid-sentence, and it kept getting louder and louder till Tsum exploded. The Hiashi had a stern expression like always and obviously wasn't quite happy with the situation. Shibi showed the Abiram's ability to be quieter than the Hyuga without the accompanying oppressing aura. Inoichi gave an exasperated sigh and Choza held his head on his hands. Fugaku appeared disinterested. Tsum looked ready for murder and like a wolf ready to pounce, all the while Shikaku was uncharacteristically laughing quite hard. All of the villagers of the council were less than pleased and the disgusted sights of some were quite a sight. Silence. But all got quiet indiscriminately as the Hokage spoke those words. Even the villagers felt the seriousness on his voice or his powerful desire to be heard without protest, so it wasn't a mystery they normally kept quiet even when they were as rowdy as they were at the hour of taking decisions. Sarutobi looked at each of their faces one by one and held his gaze over certain individuals for an instant longer. It was short, so nobody really realized it. Or even if they did, they didn't show it. In things like these, body language was or rather, more important than anything that came out of the mouth. Cold reading was the butter to everyone's bread in here, no matter the level of mastery. Good. The Hokage said finally after giving everyone a good look. Before we begin, I'll be clear about something first. Some eyebrows rose. The topic that we will discuss is quite a sensitive issue. I expect a certain attitude from all of you, as this topic affects our village as a whole and could very well have an enormous impact on us. One that, I assure you, you will not wish to see the repercussions of. If that's clear, we will move into the topic at hand. If the sudden meeting hadn't caught anyone's interest, this sure did. Now anyone that looked irritated or honestly uninterested had a different glint to their eyes. Then Sarutobi drew one last calming breath. We will discuss the lineage of Naruto Uzumaki. Many unexpected gasps. The many villagers had faces quickly contorted in disgust, hate or plain and obvious dislike. Sarutobi had been very clear about a certain attitude concerning the topic and anyone with half a brain would have realized this was it. They either didn't care, which was unlikely due to how cowardly and sly they tended to be, or they simply thought they wouldn't receive any kind of reprimand or even punishment if they made their dislike blatantly obvious. Bad idea, the ninjas thought. It was normally the case that was exactly what happened, but they felt something different in the Sandaime today. One villager sighed. Ha. Hokage-sama, you surely aren't serious, right? Another clicked his tongue. Damn street rat. I can very easily remember how he tried snatching food off of one of my stalls in the market area. Another, a husky woman, said. We would be doing him a favor calling him a rat. He just wanders around the street and I have heard rumors about him trying to mug some poor kids while their parents aren't nearby. Mug kids? And what would kids have? A haughty-looking man sneered. Is he so pathetically desperate he can't do anything else? Doesn't even have the courage to confront a real man face to face. The FFT, just what you would expect from such a rotten child. Added a woman suddenly, who unlike the vast number of the villagers, was surprisingly attractive looking. A good figure, more than passable face, and groomed lustrous pink hair that looked obviously cared for. It was Sakri Haruno, probably the biggest voice in more ways that one, among the whole of the villagers side of the council. She was more or less normal as a villager, not really a very prominent family or prosperous merchant. What she had was a silver tongue more effective than any kunai and a shrewdness that was troublesome, to say the least. The starved 5-year-old are confronting a grown man while suffering of malnutrition. Are they truly babbling such insanity? As Saratobi thought so with increasing disgust, he mentally sighed as he let the villagers keep gossiping. Meh, whatever. This will be much more entertaining in this way. As an old man with such workload, very few things were a true joy. This would be one of those gems. Naruto Uzumaki, or I would rather call him Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki. All noise stopped. Like a tempest that suddenly disappeared, like a stampede that abruptly halted, like a house poltergeist that quickly seized all activity after going crazy. Oh Hokage-sama, what did you just? What you clearly heard, I'm afraid. They kept silent. But after a while, Hokage-sama, such jokes shouldn't be made on such a serious meeting, someone said while laughing nervously. Exactly. A random other added briskly. Hokage-sama, it's obvious there's something of great importance you wish to discuss. Such jokes will simply spoil this important conversation. Sigh. So they will escape reality to this extent is what the Sandaime contemplated in silence. This is not a joke and certainly not something to be taken lightly. If what I have told you would elicit such responses from all of you, you surely understood the message. But, Hokage-sama, such a thing is. Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki. Both are shinobi of the highest regard in our village. This simply is. Those two incredible people from our village and that demon surely. The terrible feeling of foreboding shut off all noises. Demon, the Hokage softly said out loud. You surely wouldn't be referring to Naruto, are you? Referring to Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage, and our savior's son, in such a way and also in front of my presence, the third Hokage, with such carelessness certainly my ears must be lying to me. My age may be finally affecting me. Not one more comment like that was made. That didn't remove the dissatisfaction out of anyone's face. The village side had the same eyes as ever. The Hokage lowered his presence. Good. Now to continue on to the real subject, which is that there was a piece of withheld information. Utmost secret information probably none of you were ever aware of. The last part of the statement was directed towards the clan heads and they responded in kind with confused expressions and dubious looks. The name also isn't Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Rather, it's supposed to be Naruto Gremory Namikaze. That revelation felt like a true earthquake. The earth shook and rumbled and everything all around rattled incessantly. Hokage-sama, what's the meaning of this? Shikaku Nara talked at once. As expected of the Nara, he recovered quickly. Or perhaps he wasn't fully convinced. This kind of thing, if you may permit my rudeness, the boy itself isn't part of any clan and any inheritance would only be derived out of the Namikaze part of his blood. From that point of view, nothing about this should hold any interest to us, it simply doesn't merit a meeting. The troublesome part is, what are you trying to imply saying this? The clan heads weren't idiots. They could put two and two together quite easily, so both the better and lesser informed arrived at the conclusion of who the boy was years ago. The Sandaime had never felt a need to tell them the truth directly because he knew all of them had been in contact with Kushina and Minato enough that they could draw their own conclusions. He was also interested in their individual decisions about what to do with the child himself, but that's another matter. That the Yondaime had offspring still alive was a big subject by itself, so it was certainly a matter that would have piqued their interest if they hadn't ever realized who he was. As they did, the important matter was another. That Uzumaki was removed and instead this Gremory was attached could only mean two things. 1. Minato had gotten into an affair. 2. Kushina wasn't in Uzumaki. The first, mostly, was something personal. Every ninja present there had engaged in extensive conversations for one reason or another with Minato on the past, and more than half of them considered the man a friend or respectable person. To learn such a thing was troubling on a personal level, and if such a subject got out, the Hokage's image could be tainted in the eyes of the villagers. It didn't sound much, but the Hokage was still the biggest pillar that supported a village. It was a big deal. But it was also troubling in a way related to why the second possibility was a problem. If Kushina was in Uzumaki, then what was she? This wasn't as pivotal as the related question that would inevitably come to one's mind. What are the Gremorys? That he was the Hokage's son wasn't a big deal. It was already a known matter by those that should know, and by a few more informed others that also knew how to put two and two together. This wasn't the main subject, therefore, the other last name was the real main subject. In the face of the subject of someone with direct blood relations with a cage, something like the rest of the bloodline shouldn't matter unless it carried some big meaning on itself. It carried an enormous meaning, as the Sandame's attitude made obvious if one remembered the beginning of this meeting. And to further complicate matters, nobody there knew the surname Gremory. It didn't even feel native, more like foreign. This was the troubling part. The truly important matter they were called to discuss. Also, it would be worse if it were the first case. They at least had the link called Kushina to connect them to this unknown, while an unknown lover left them with nothing. Plus, things may drastically change depending on the fate of said lover or the viewpoints of her family regarding that. The villagers had realized none of this secret context, and the ninjas were secretly happy about that. Tsukuya Haruno had quite a particular gaze, however. That's exactly what I have come here to discuss, Shikaku. The Hokage turned to the door to the left of the room, all the way to the corner. Please come inside, Sirzechs. Sirzechs? As foreign and unknown as the surname. The two fit quite nicely, so using common sense, this Sirzechs person couldn't be anyone else than another one of these Gremories. Everybody organized their thoughts and tried to keep themselves as stoic as possible. Whatever came through that door was not normal, or was something that couldn't be just dismissed. Even if they had their defense so high, it may have been the same even if they didn't raise them at all. What came through that door blew them away, and to try to describe it beyond that would be a useless task. Hey Tsum. What, Shikaku? But the kind of face you have right now you could pass for a teenager, you know. You at least look as stupefied as one. That's so? When even Tsum and Yazuka wouldn't retort to such an insult, or was it really one you'd realize something grand happened? And that was Sirzechs Gremory. Nice to meet you, all of you. My name is Sirzechs Gremory, brother of Kushina Gremory. It's a real pleasure to meet each and every one of you all. And with a light smile, he gave a light bow. He had calmed down and didn't want any problems, so most of his more amiable personality had come back. The only response were the hollow mutters and musings of sister, he's her looks foreign who is he. Also, he gave a pretty bright and happy smile. Who exactly called my nephew a demon? Would you kindly tell me? With a jolt of fear that even the clan heads felt, most of the civilians looked towards the guy that had originally said it. He looked apprehensive and short of breath the moment he realized what situation that was in, and Sirzechs' direct gaze was obviously making weak in the knees. Hiruzen heard him mutter something strange as he merrily smiled. I don't know how you have time to think such things when you have to lift the sky, but this would you kindly thingy really has some nice effect. Or was that the other he muttered? Said Sirzechs in contemplation. So that's how is it, Hiruzen. They felt they were a danger and sold him out without a second thought. You truly have great countrymen as subordinates. Don't rub such things into people's faces with such a content look. The old man sighed. Please. I may look like this smiling, but I certainly couldn't be farther from being merry at the moment. Sirzechs clarified in a crystal clear tone, which everyone else most likely heard. Sirzechs-san. Yeah, Shikaku-san. Hahaha. Please don't be afraid, I was listening to the whole thing from the very start after all. Your voice has a certain tone to it, it would be difficult to miss. So, what did you want to ask? So I have such a troublesome tone. Duly noted, thanks for that anyway, I'd like to hear about you and Kushina before we start the next part of this meeting more properly. This is why you're here for after all, isn't that right? Hiruzen, you really have some nice subordinates here and there. It's good to see you have people like that, but of course. Shikaku is one of my best men. I can say that with full proudness. Hokage-sama instead of a look of awe, a tired look like he didn't want such taxing attention was on the Nara's face. I understand. Then I will explain. Old Present leaned forward almost by instinct. You see, I'm not aware of how much do you realize it, but there's quite vast amounts of lands outside the area you know. I have a country outside in such areas, and so, from where I come from it's somewhere none of the 5 elemental nations are likely to be aware of. It's quite distant honestly. Also I'm, technically alongside 4 others, the supreme ruler of said land. The 5 elemental nations stuttered Tsum in disbelief. What kind of god-forsaken place is so far away that it isn't even known by the entirety of the nations? Also, supreme ruler Kushina was like royalty. You could say but the post isn't decided by blood but rather by aptitude, like the Hokage post. Hiashi Hyuga opened his mouth for the first time. 4 others so your land is ruled by a council of 4. Is that possibly the result of ideological separations? Is there numerous clans like our own inhabiting your homeland, Sirzechs-san? He gave a confirmation nod. As expected of Hiashi-san, you were right on the mark. To be more specific, there were about 72 whole clans. 72 Inoichi and Choza voiced their disbelief. Yeah. Each one has very different customs, value system, characteristics, ways of thinking, and most prominently abilities. There's also a kind of ranking, with certain clans being upper in the ladder than others. The greatest of them all is called Bale. Bale Fugaku Uchiha repeated in interest. But that's beside the point. Sirzech's got them back on track. The main thing is that many years ago, there was a great commotion, or rather, an accident, and my sister ended up coming to this place that you call your home. Things happened, a kind of big incident that you wouldn't know about, and I don't want to deal with explaining happened, and she decided to stay here. Dad talked about their hospitability. Sarutobi then shuddered out of nowhere and looked like he had seen a ghost. And after setting the term straight, she decided to stay here. Easy as that really. After that, she got well acquainted with Mito Uzumaki, and with Hiruzen asking as a favor, she was named as an Uzumaki. The word of the first's wife was not gonna be just disregarded, so there weren't too many difficulties. But of course, my sister decided to take on a very peculiar burden by her own choice. There was a change in the tone of voice, and it was felt with clarity. Sirzech's eyes narrowed a fair deal like he was having trouble thinking or rather recalling. Took on that beast, the Kyuubi. That thing you keep like some very oversized pet that doesn't quit like you if I do remember. Sirzech's-san, Hiashi's voice could be heard with a thin tone of warning. You would do well to watch your words. This isn't your land, and certainly not your country. I'm well aware of that, Hiashi-san, Sirzech's said in a calm voice, surprising the Hyuga that was expecting a more brazen response. Also, had they ever mentioned his name in the whole meeting? But you see, I very much value honesty, really. If any of my statements doesn't hold any true to them, please feel free to correct them. And so Sirzech's continued. So then, this ferocious beast. Apparently, the seal that keeps that thing chained to its metaphysical prison gets weaker during pregnancy and reaches its weakest during the time of the birthing. Preparations were made, many contingency plans, reserve ways to deal with a bad scenario, and many other things to properly prevent such a thing in the first place. So it failed, miserably. And for your blunder, I lost my sister, almost lost my nephew, and you all lost a sizable quantity of why. You should learn when to shut your mouth, foreigner. Fugaku growled. And Sirzech's stopped talking. He turned in the Uchiha's direction slowly. So, am I wrong about what I just said? And a quick Sirzech's, swift like the wind, looked like he teleported as he appeared just in front of Fugaku. The Uchiha was caught completely off guard. Then it wasn't a threatening tone that made Fugaku go into the defensive, but a strange one that made him unable to think for a few seconds. Who killed my sister? Eh? Who was it? Sirzech's asked him in a weird tone that made Fugaku feel heavy, all the while looking him in the eye. Who? The fox. Then why did the fox get out when you had everything prepared to prevent that? Just a simply blunder. I doubt so. Was it any of you then? As he looked at the rest of the heads. I don't think so. Then you? He asked the civils, who jerked back a bit except for a few. No, not enough in you to do it. If you even had a way, then someone else from the inside. Can you give me names? Fugaku was still mute. Then you can't help me. Was it somebody from the outside then? So you let someone unaffiliated infiltrate so easily and mess up such a big event? Whose else fault is it? Who do I look to? Fugaku. Fugaku Uchiha was left wordless. Shikaku muttered troublesome as he got his breath back. Toza was somewhat fidgety. Hiashi had a very severe look on his face, but it wasn't directed to anybody on particular. Shibi was as silent as ever, but there was a distinctive low buzzing unlike before. Inoichi had his teeth gritted, but it wasn't too obvious. Sume had a look of distaste. Sirzech's drew a calming breath to continue. That's okay and all, but that's not the main issue. Rather, what I truly want to ask of all of you is what is my nephew supposed to be doing dragging himself through the mud like an abandoned ragdoll, barely not dying from starvation, but a dirty body filled with scars that I don't even want to begin deciphering which were accidents or which were inflicted. Or why was he about a minute or two away from dying to a random mob of ravenously hateful civils and an agent of your so-called forces, Anbu, but said operative cutting his vocal threads to most likely rob him of the ability of even trying to scream for help. Those accusations were heavy. They all understood it, but Sarutobi hadn't raised his hand or interrupted him even once, so he either didn't want the foreigner directly, which sounded like a stupid impossibility to the clan heads, or he was telling the absolute truth. As members of this village, this didn't sit well with them. That they weren't aware that the petty rage of the civilians and even one in their ranks had reached such levels was embarrassing to say the least, and mortifying at worst. The clan heads did actually intervene with matters related to the young boy, but any of them directly taking care of him would have had undesirable repercussions. If this had been before the civilians in the council had gotten more influence, as most were merchants that were big parts of their economy or families with weight to their name that helped with their public relations and image, things wouldn't have been so obnoxiously hard. Even as far as their own members went, things weren't rainbows and sunshine. Many were of the same mind as the villagers, and even those that could see there was no point on blaming the blameless infant, the resentment from lost ones wasn't such a simple manner. Then there were the idiots that wanted to take full control of the kid and use him like some kind of super weapon, the typical idiots that thought of going to the moon without knowing how to make a spacecraft. As long as they tried, some way would come up or they could think something later, so there was no reason to give it much thought, right? Better get him before anyone else does, right? Idiots. As they had such thoughts, the still mostly unknown foreigner said something unexpected. Sirzech's eyes darted across the hall. So you did care. Sirzech's noted with dull amazement as he saw the various clan heads' reactions. The clans didn't know what to make out of such an affirmation. The Ino Chikacho trio, they always appeared quite decent so it didn't strike me as weird. Sum is quite brusque and fierce, but she certainly is a good alpha. Such a situation really wasn't to her taste, was it? The mentioned individuals were in frozen puzzlement, not knowing what was an adequate response. Shibi, you look like the objective and unbiased kind of fair judge, so you didn't really surprise me. Hiashi, yeah, you are a man of rules. Strict, severe, and very rigid, but you aren't a bully or a real oppressor. You follow the rules because you truly believe they can bring a good and stable path. I see. Fugaku, the Uchiha had such an expression that looked like he was gonna get chewed out at any moment. The redid's previous rant had obviously affected him. I'll have to apologize, it looks like I judged you wrongly. Fugaku exclaimed in real surprise. This may be my incorrect assessment since I already judged wrongly once, but you don't seem to have any kind of predisposition towards Naruto yourself. Rather you may have wanted to actually help my nephew. I wasn't informed well, not exactly, he muttered the last part. But I wasn't exactly aware of your wife's relationship with my sister. But you have been actually good friends with her and Minato. I don't. Fugaku didn't seem to know how to reason out a concrete answer. This had taken himself by full surprise. The clan faulted with orchestrating the whole Kyuubi incident. As the beast's Jinchuriki, I'm sure that the mere act of trying to help it may have been detrimental for your clan as a whole. I don't really care whether the kindness may have been extended from your wife's hands or yours personally. Like Hiashi, you appear stern and hearty, with an air of severeness, even if yours is different from his. But I can tell you likely didn't sit well with the treatment here advised. For that, I can only express my apologies. I judged you wrongly. To finish the deal, Sirzech's bowed to emphasize the honesty of his words. It wasn't a quick bow, like getting a formality out of the way, but a deep one that saw the redid's back almost parallel to the ground. Fugaku simply had no words, and his mouth just hung open. A few of the more expressive clan leaders were in similar positions. The couple of coughs caught everyone's attention. It had been Shikaku. The Hokage had given him a look that only said, "Could you please?" How troublesome. As shameful as it is to admit, all you have said is certainly true. Sugarcoating it or running away from our mistakes takes us nowhere, so that's the undeniable truth. As we are much better aware of the situation, there's nothing much that needs to be said. Naturally, we will not inquire anything about your home unless you yourself decide to tell us. Trying to set relations with a foreign power we weren't aware of like hungry wolves seeking hunting grounds wouldn't look good for us in this situation. That brings me to my real question, are you perhaps planning on taking that brat with you? The clan heads quickly looked towards Shikaku in disbelief or pure surprise. The notion was possible. Rather, if you gave it a good thought and analyzed Sirzech's attitude along the whole meeting and the reason for the meeting itself, the goal that he wanted to reach was related to that kid one way or another, and there were few things he could be going after. But his strange aura and presence had numbed them as they tired getting used to him, plus the surprise of who he was and who Kushina really was had occupied their concentration maybe a little bit too much. That's exactly that. I desire to take my nephew back with me and provide the proper environment and home that he deserves. That's the least I can do in my sister's name and my own. There were a few seconds of silence, which didn't last long. Do you truly understand the implications of such actions, Sirzech's-san? I clearly do, Hiashi-san. The Hyuga head looked into Sirzech's with a critical eye and a piercing gaze like he was analyzing him fully, from head to toes, and even into the corners of his mind. I'll be clear here. I did not, from the start, think about just suddenly grabbing him and disappear. That's why I'm here in the first place. Then what are your intentions? Asked a sweating Inoichi. To nurture him and help him grow. Sirzech's answered in a clear voice. Naruto is my nephew and has certainly gone through less than desirable experiences while inhabiting this village. That doesn't change the fact that he is himself. Until he is of age enough that he can care for himself and take a decision by his own will, I'll take proper care of him. If he decides to come back to this place, then we will not get in his way. Sum clicked her mouth. TCH, as if. Be real pretty boy. If that kid chooses to live in this hellhole that has probably traumatized him already instead of whatever luxury awaits someone of a prestigious family, I can only say I have gone crazy or that someone has cast some pretty powerful genjutsu on him. Or maybe he will resent us even more. Yeah, that sounds likely. There's also other problems concerning his status as a Jinchuriki. They are like the face of a village's power, whether they can control said power or not. It's like a badge of status that can have enormous influence when it comes to our public standing compared to the other elemental nations. From things as simple as missions to the support many landlords give us because of our prestige or the power we showcase in their eyes, we could lose more than you can imagine. Fugaku added in a factual tone. After compassing himself, he had become proactive again. That's certainly true, Sirzechs said in a low voice as if he was contemplating those words by himself. However, think of the alternative. A Jinchuriki, and the one that has the mighty Kyuubi no less, coming to fully hate and resent you. That's like a ticking time bomb, one which fews you keep shortening yourselves. The blast radius is each and every one of you. You either rein him in or get crushed under his paw. Next, the rest of the fire country goes down, untold damage and lives are claimed in the territories all around, and you can only guess how effective any countermeasures set forth by the other 4 elemental nations will be, if they have the time to set any. The few present grumbled at such a realistic prospect. Also, I give my word I will give support, military or otherwise, as compensation for any negative repercussions. As long as you don't abuse or trust, I will pay you back as is due. When he put it like that, honestly, the clan heads had been into this debate about the kid for longer than they like to think about. They argued with themselves. They argued with each other. They argued with others, those that shared their viewpoints and those who didn't. And by far, this sounded like the best possible answer. When it sounded so good, they just couldn't believe it was true. I understand your concern, Sirzechs noted the tense atmosphere. That's why I called for this meeting with Hiruzen as a witness because he's also my assurance. After a good and long discussion, he has decided to approve of my decision, alongside 3 other ninjas he wishes to place in my care due to various circumstances surrounding them. This may sound like some dirty business tactic, or you may think I used some foreign methods to brainwash him, but I'll say it anyways. If you cannot place your trust in me, a simple stranger, place it on your leader, Hiruzen Sarutobi. The clan heads fell silent, obviously using every brain cell that they possessed to process this decision. They were giving it a good long thought, and that calmed Sirzechs as he felt they were actually considering it. It was still far too early to shout success, but he still felt hopeful. In a way also thankful, as these persons were seriously considering his petitions even under these sudden circumstances, no more than his word and that of their leader as assurance, and any shred of guilt they may have felt towards his sister, Minato and Naruto after the years serving as his only other help. They were either desperate or really agonizing for many years about not being able to help just one child like Hiruzen had. Sirzechs would be extremely naive to think them such saints or good-natured persons, but he didn't feel any real figment of depravity or cruelty from any of them. For that he was also truly thankful. After some minutes of deliberation, Shikaku lifted his head and looked towards all his fellows clan heads. One by one they gave a nod, reluctantly, hesitantly, decidedly. Not one was the same as the other, but they all nodded. Shikaku then said something about wanting to partake in more discussions with the Grimoire to set the more specific details and whatnot till they were comfortable enough with the agreement. Sirzechs happily accepted, but they had suddenly noticed something. They had all nodded yes. Except for one person. Fugaku-san. The Uchiha kept his eyes closed. Nobody knew if he was still deliberating or doing some kind of silent resistance. At last, his mouth opened. Tell me, Sirzechs-san, who are the 3 other shinobis the Hokage set in your care? Through some kind of silent agreement, the clan heads had decided to question such matters later, likely wanting to have time to properly digest. Sirzechs felt a foreboding feeling as Fugaku asked that question. Anko Mitarashi, Hyuga Yuzuki and Itachi Uchiha. The other heads were obviously surprised. There was no need to point that out or even why they were surprised. The answers to such questions were obvious as day. The true wonder was how Fugaku, after hearing that, apparently kept his composure. You do realize what that means, right? Certainly. With the Uchiha planning a coup d'etat, losing their strongest trump card would be unthinkable, right? Sirzechs dropped the C word, and it had its expected effect. The whole matter of the Uchiha's possible takeover attempt was handled as if it wasn't a real subject or like a topic that didn't exist except in secure personal meetings or the like. Fugaku didn't look like he even minded. That's so? Then you will understand the proposition is impossible for me. I was already thinking of taking care of that. After all, I don't want Naruto to come back here just as a formality. His mother lived here by her own choice and died here by her own choice, and I think there's meaning to that. If when we come back there's only a smoldering crater, there's not much of a home to come back to. So you're saying this matter concerns you as much as it concerns us? How intrusive of you. And how exactly do you want to repair this situation on the first place? By killing you, of course. Everybody except Fugaku and the Sandaime had a visible reaction. Even the eternally stoic Shibi had shook on his seat noticeable. Even then though, Fugaku still remained calm. Unnervingly calm, and with such an expression that it appeared the matter didn't even concern him. The clan heads had quickly wiped their heads to the side, afraid of what the civilians may have said. As they did so, they noted the abnormality that they hadn't perceived at the start. They hadn't heard even one of the civilians' voices since quite a while ago. And when they turned around they got their answer. The many civilians of the council were fast asleep, or rather looked more knocked out than asleep. I knocked them out since a while back. I doubted they would contribute a lot to this discussion, so I beg your pardon for taking action without asking. Sirzechs said as he still glared at Fugaku. Not that anybody was complaining about the knocked out civilians. Do you honestly think is that simple, brat? Suddenly killing a clan head, I can only think about the chaos and destruction that the ones in our clan would explode with if they heard such a thing had happened. So they finally turned their backs on us. They tricked Fugaku-san and will likely come for us too. Those bastards. They played the peacemakers and good persons while planning all this. Something like that I think. That isn't exactly right, Fugaku-san. After all, the actual percentage of Uchiha that support you is less than half the clan. This goes to the non-combatants, like the women's, mostly mothers, of your clan that aren't kunoichi, most of the few males that aren't shinobi, a good deal of the older clan members, and by default the kids, even if they don't know the true clan affairs. Most of the military and combat-capable forces are with you, but not the whole clan. Even if it ends up unfavorably, certainly, a good deal may accept an ending without bloodshed. Even if resentment may persist among many of them. How do you plan to achieve such a thing? Simply killing me will just make matters worse. Sirzechs narrowed his eyes before turning his back on Fugaku and fetching something near the Sandaime's chair. Some papers, which he threw to Fugaku. The Uchiha had quite cautious eyes and with suspicion began eyeing the documents before his eyes went wide with surprise. Photos of secret meetings. Names of individuals. Times and places of meetings and somehow the contents of many of their conversations. With this kind of information, it will be pretty obvious we had our reasons. We know who is in it and also have already planned ways to deal with them one at a time. Of course, we will arrest them and only try to kill them if they resist to the extreme. If restraining them without killing them means a few broken extremities or the like, that's acceptable too. By the way, I have quite a lot of info on most likely illegal activities conducted by a fair amount of the men and women here. Sirzechs said as he pointed a straight finger towards the civilians. The message got across, but everybody was tense seeing the situation. Except Hiruzen, who seemed just saddened. Fugaku kept looking at the various files. Whole written conversations, varied maps with the routes that many of the clan members take when going from place to place, files for every one of the people under him, with detailed information on each of them. I'm fairly interested in how the Hokage got such information. Though he hasn't talked much though the meeting, has he? That was a request of mine. Sirzechs interjected. Till the end, even if it may have ended in even more casualties, Hiruzen wanted to find a way to end things peacefully. One way or another, I pushed him into this. No matter how objectively correct this decision may be, it still is a fact a lot of sacrifices will be made, and I forced him into this due to my own selfish reasons. So, I want to deal with all this in his stead. If he decides to change his mind or give a piece of his thoughts, he is free to do so. That aside, Fugaku-san, this info wasn't obtained through Hiruzen's means, but my own. Fugaku suddenly looked at him mildly surprised. Your own? You have been in the village barely one day as far as I'm aware. How could you plant such an effective information net? No matter how I wrap it around my head, this seems simply impossible. We didn't simply let Kushina go like that. My parents are worwarts like no other, so we had ways to keep tabs on her. Well, he was more or less a Siskin, so he wasn't exempt from the worwart description. But that was beside the point. In the first place, they hadn't set up the system that kept track of Kushina's condition. But also in the first place, the setup was meant for Kushina only. He had made a village-wide net that gathered and classified information, depending upon a number of means. When, how and why were all unknown to him, but the thought of seeking him out just to ask that wasn't even close to crossing his mind. In the first place, he wasn't even aware at first. Originally, devils used diverse ways to communicate with each other, but the spread of technology, or the demonic equivalent using their own knowledge of magic and other subjects, had begun quite some time ago in the demon world. That aside, the previous ways of communication were still preferred and somewhat more efficient if you knew how to deal with them. The point is, he was in possession of a communication device very much like a cell phone. It looked like a cell phone, but could be used even through different dimensions and in very weird places. It had been provided by him so that he and Sirzechs could communicate directly, an idea he didn't quite like at first. Once he told him how to contact other people with it and how to add contacts, Sirzechs decided to keep it for its efficiency. Whatever alien technology it worked on was unknown to him, as it didn't need to be charged by any means, also as said, could make calls even to different dimensions, could make multiple individual calls, a bunch of other functions he didn't feel the need to use. That Candy Crush installed and was all around much easier to use. Sirzechs hadn't noted it at first, but a message from him had reached him some time after he had first entered this dimension. He dreaded the mere thought of reading it, imagining whatever craziness that bastard was sure to impose on him. As he was busy with such important matters, his despair grew palpable. It wasn't until he read it and found out about the other Red he had set up for reasons unknown. The fact he had communicated him this just a bit after he had come here didn't leave any doubt on his mind that he was plenty aware of his situation. It's far too complicated to explain. That aside, Fugaku-san, I wanted to ask something myself, said Sirzechs with a suddenly more solemn expression. Fugaku noted said expression and withdrew his attention from the papers in his hands and concentrated it fully on the redid in front of him. What? Are you dissatisfied with something? Your attitude is completely strange. Sirzechs began to explain. Even as this happens, you don't look agitated, angry, or desperate. Rather you look calm. Almost like some big weight is being lifted off of you. Fugaku slowly digested what Sirzechs told him. After a while, he gave a big sigh. My clan is my number #1 priority, as has always been. When the incident with the Kyuubi happened, I was honestly angry. Immensely angry the Uchiha had lost people to that monster too. More than most realize or care. But even after all we have been doing for the village, or how they weren't the only ones with losses, we found fingers pointed at our faces and accusations thrown at us, it was honestly very infuriating. Do you know? There's something, like a flaw you could say, a curse passed down our clan. It's called the curse of hatred, like the Uchiha were destined to get their eyes gouged out until they retaliated and gouged their assaulters' eyes back till the whole world may go blind. It wasn't any raging inferno or something childish like that, but a slow poison. The more they talked behind our backs and muddied our name with baseless rumors and gossip without sense, the more previously impossible thoughts drilled their way into our heads and minds. It was as simple as that. However, I also realized how weary it is. I cannot talk with my clanmates without being looked at like we're planning something devious, and I cannot shake the truth off that may very well be the case most of the time. I cannot go outside or do my duties without receiving glares of hate from the other people or glares of expectation from my clan. They either pierce me or weight me. I cannot see any normal discussion between those of my clan and anybody else without the smallest thought that this may end much worse and trigger something horrible. Burning hatred that does not get released anywhere for years, crushing weight as the sway of my actions dictate the fate of my clan, of my village, of maybe even the whole ninja world, detachment from my sons, one that likely hates me or despises me, another that likely can only see an uncaring father that looks more like a puppet than a human. But even then, nothing can be done. They still burn with the hatred and are counting on me. I still burn with the hatred as I hear their slander and their conceited insults when they don't even know anything. I can only go back and betray my people while leaving them to their devices, unaware what craziness they may plan out while our clan keeps getting dragged through the mud. I can only go forward and aware of the disaster I will cause and not having the willpower to sell my brothers and sisters so that the most number of people can survive. I can only burn red hot with hatred while weary of all this depressing obsessiveness with an objective that will not even give me anything of value. Of course, I'm dissatisfied. I can't go back and I break down as I move forward. I will only be a betrayer coward standing at the back as a chaos unfolds or a crumbling statue laying on the ground as my actions damn many more. Of course I am dissatisfied. If the will of fire is the inheritance the Senju left the village, this curse of hatred can only be the biggest mockery. Of course I'm dissatisfied. And so Fugaku Uchiha gave a rant that nobody could have expected out of him. He was breathing haphazardly after talking so much, and the other clan heads, who had remained silent since some while ago, not daring to interrupt this, had mouths gaping or looks that could only be called befuddlement, puzzlement, lost eyes like they had seen some impossible illusion and disbelief that was almost palpable. Nobody at all, had expected this out of Fugaku Uchiha. Are you saying you want to end it like this? If you kill me, a much better option will open up somehow, isn't that right? Isn't that running away? Grabbing onto my pride will only worsen things. A man has his pride, but something very close to that is what started this disaster in the first place. Cowardly is the world I least care about at the moment. Are you sure? You aren't lying and putting on a strong front. We may have met only a couple of minutes back, but I'll still ask you, even if the answer may have no question. Fugaku's Uchiha Sharingan activated. With the blood-red eyes with the strange 3-tomo image in the center, he looked straight at Sirzechs. The other clan heads had suddenly gotten on their guards, but Sirzechs hadn't moved even a muscle. Do I look like the type of person that would be lying? Sighing almost in resignation, Sirzechs replied. Not at all. HMPH. Fugaku closed his eyes again and looked as if thinking of something. Yeah, now that I think about it, your sister was a weirdo too. First time we met and she had made me raise my voice more than that young kid from our clan that died in a mission under Minato, Abito. The little rascal was always stirring some problems. Mikoto was quite surprised to have found me yelling. Same goes to Minato. I think I can really believe you about the sister-brother thing. That's not the kind of proof I wanted people to use. Sirzechs lightly chuckled before raising a hand slightly before it was covered on some strange light of deepest crimson. Not gonna say any last words for your wife. Maybe Itachi. Last words? Fugaku repeated with his one mouth as if the idea didn't make sense to him. All present kept their eyes open, not wanting to miss even a part. The other clan heads had come to the conclusion there was nothing they could say, nothing they could have said. Anything that comes to mind would have made a mumbled mess. Whatever was the reason Fugaku was accepting of death so gracefully and suddenly off of a stranger slipped their minds. No, it didn't exactly did. The clan heads were aware of how Fugaku's attitude turned number or more exhausted, looking as the months passed since quite some time ago. He kept a formidable mask up, but the clan heads had noted the very minimal differences. They were the leaders of their clans for a reason after all. They could have never believed it meant something like this. Or that it would end on something like this. The Fugaku seemed to have come to a decision. Tell them. Yeah, I get it. I'll tell them. Sirzechs said as he held something of darkest red on his hand. It wasn't the deepest crimson that glowed with ominous power, but the still beating heart of Fugaku Uchiha, who lay dead in his seat in the council room. Hokage office. Here's in Sarutobi. Sandame Hokage. The professor. God of Shinobi. This veteran at life and as a ninja, leader of the objectively mightiest village out of the 5 nations, a genius of unprecedented insight, intellect, ingenuity, compassion, tolerance and other admirable traits. He had an aura that for an old man of his looks would impress those not in the known and awe or terrify those that understood who he was. This same legend which carries behind his back a reputation of extreme renown and with the kind of power in his prime that pure terror was the only conceivable answer before him, was currently experiencing one of the worst headaches in the story of his career as he dined on some dango and tea. He had not even the drive to properly eat. The cause of this deplorable state of his. Technically, a 5-year-old that had a face that would mesmerize you as you wondered what gender he was and long hair that would sell like high-class porcelain in some shady black market. Not that Hiruzen knew anything about the black market dealings and of the whole market centered around the buying and selling of hair, for whatever purpose nothing at all. Such a market also didn't exist because that rumor of around half a decade ago about the Sandame roaming shadier areas in search of a high-quality wig was completely false. All those ninja that claimed witness were also a bunch of liars. He also didn't know a thing about those letters addressed to said witness threatening to blackmail them should they ever say a word. Neither did he know of said blackmail material actually getting released to the public when they failed to comply and ended up talking. Not at all. But back on subject, it was technically the boy's fault. It was, more realistically, actually the toddler's uncle's fault. The killing of Fugaku would have its repercussions, alongside the arresting of all his accomplices. The stigma the Uchiha clan would have as a whole after this was something that weighed in Hiruzen's mind, and the possibility of the curse of hatred resurfacing again had him terrified. His only respite was that some kind of deal could be made with those opposed to the coup d'etat and that their influence could calm any resentment or hate before it budded in the hearts of the easily misled children or the more stubborn of the adults. In the first place, Fugaku being killed so quickly wasn't part of the intended plan, so preparations had been done in haste to mobilize every Chunin, Jounin and Anbu nearby and arrest the conspirators before news of their leader's death spread, pushing them into a more reckless behavior. That aside, the execution had been out of nowhere, in front of the other clan leaders, and in Sarutobi's humble opinion, some very wicked or really saintly entity of incredible power was watching them and guiding them, because the fact none of the heads further pushed the matter or got out of control was nothing short of miracle, divine intervention. Though the old man realized it was deliberate and not some stroke of luck. The only explanation he could conjure in his head was related to Fugaku's own behavior, as every one of the heads had come to realize the very peculiarly exhausted and downtrodden aura the Uchiha radiated with greater intensity each passing day. At some point, it became something more like bitterness and frustration, and only now Hiruzen truly realized that the bitterness he didn't direct to those in very volatile terms with the Uchiha and kept sealed in himself like he was trying to control something, wasn't him controlling himself at all. It was just Fugaku's pent-up depression and stress, driving him to the point more than half of that stinging aura that made others keep their distances from him was directed at his own self in loathing and hate, and even at his own clan mates. Now those rumors about Fugaku's strange volatile behavior and foul mood during recent clan meetings made much more sense. The other heads may have realized, and the smarter or more aware ones like Shikaku and Hiashi may have come to an answer very close to the truth, even if they didn't realize themselves. Hiruzen felt Fugaku's resentment affected him so much because the man himself had never expected such a feeling of such magnitude brewing under his burning anger, so the Sandaime didn't need to give it much thought when he tried to imagine the clan head's responses to such a thing. It had been successful, yes, very much so. The threat of the Uchiha opposition disappeared for the time being, and the resulting body count was way lower than expected parameters. But Hiruzen would always be himself. As he thought of the bitter Uchiha leader that couldn't back down like a coward and traitor but was breaking down as he moved forward, that desire of his to settle things peacefully burned even hotter. He was now more decided and convinced since ever that the whole conflict may have truly ended without bloodshed. But the folly of his thoughts was all too painfully obvious, for the curse of hatred carried by the Uchiha was a scar deeper than any Hiruzen may have ever gotten during his long career. To say he was depressed about the result was an understatement. The Hokage sighed. I'm far too old for all this. My poor body likely lost 5 years in between all this mess. Wow, truly? An amazed voice asked in awe. That old body of yours has years left to lose. And what special occasion warrants your presence here, my dear friend Sirzechs? Sirzechs made some slightly exaggerated motions with his mouth and arms, even as his voice kept mostly calm. Woo, I'm so terrified. The depths of my soul freezes and the tip of my fingers grow numb. You may want to drop it a bit, by the way. Pour a bit more killing intent out and your staff may come here to see whatever's wrong. Sarutobi decided to drop the hostilities. He wasn't really hostile toward Sirzechs, but rather his irritability was at his max after the whole ordeal, and there were copious amounts of paperwork, his old rival. Considering the direct cause of all this was in front of him at the moment, Sarutobi couldn't restrain himself. He would have normally sighed in exasperation while trying to leave the incident behind, but he wasn't so reserved against the redid. It wasn't so much an odd friendship as it was an effect of his presence. He had seriously considered once the possibility that he was pulling his leg and used some of the foreign techniques of his dimension on him to play him a trick. He wasn't aware if they had things like Jinjutsu or a close similar, nor did he knew their properties, so the thought always popped into his mind now and then. It isn't anything so grand, so don't look at me with those scornful eyes, Sirzechs said with a light smile. I just wanted to keep you informed considering how stressed out you have been. There's no malice in my actions. Sarutobi looked at him with very critical eye before finally sighing, giving up. Yeah, I'm aware. Sorry for being so high-strung. The amount of work has been tediously big and this whole situation has been weighing on me. His face downwards as he let the exhaustion invading his body drag it down by force. You're a good man, Hiruzen. I was already expecting you to take the brunt of the more taxing tasks that needed to be done after this whole mess. Even if somebody would have offered, you would have stopped them or something. Though that look of loathing you give your paperwork hasn't quite changed. The Hokage lifted his face, his mouth open to retort to that last comment before he finally took in the redid's appearance properly. He had a black v-neck, short-sleeved t-shirt or something similar, pants very much like those worn by their ninjas in black color, only kinda less baggy looking, and very simple-looking black sandals. Sirzechs was a naturally handsome man, with white skin and vibrant red hair. These dark clothes emphasized his features quite a bit more, and their simple look made his attracting face more prominent as it caught the eye among such mundane but still stylish clothing. How did you even reach my tower without half your clothes being torn off by someone in the way? I went through the roofs. Sirzechs said in an amused tone, as if the Sandaime's question was so obvious that it was fun. He asked. We have Kunoichi who can just as easily climb and jump through our roofs and who know the layout much more than you do. Sarutobi said in a completely serious tone. Come on Hiruzen, Sirzechs said in an accusing tone. You can't be saying such things. These are the soldiers you yourself helped train. So Sarutobi was deadpanning at him with a seriously intense look. His left hand was lifted a bit, a sole finger pointing somewhere. It was a mirror at the side of the room. Sarutobi had totally forgotten why did he have it there, but that didn't matter at the moment. From where he was, Sirzechs could give himself a very good look without moving much. His clothes, his overall body, his red hair, his face. Okay, point taken. Giving some kind of dismissing shrug like the topic had bored him or his exhaustion was really beginning to affect him, Sarutobi returned to his original question. And so I ask again Sirzechs, what are you actually doing here? The old man began pouring himself some tea for the 100th time that day. He didn't have anything else like his favorite sardine fish balls or even some actually good dango, not this cheap stuff. Not even simple crack. I have at present decided to stay in the village, maybe a couple of days if not some 2 or 3 weeks. Crash. Something wrong Hiruzen. The Hokage laid paralyzed in the same position in which he had been serving his tea with his teapot. The difference was, there was no more pouring tea, the teacup was only half full, and the teapot itself now lay in pieces at Hiruzen's feet. The sizzling of the still very hot tea was audible as he had just refilled the pot just moments before Sirzech's arrived. Quite a bit had fallen in the Hokage's feet. Care to explain in detail? Hiruzen, doesn't your feet kind of hurt or some? Care to explain in detail? Hey, seriously. That thing was quite hot. The heat may affect your feet negative. Care to explain in det. I want to meet with the other clan heads. Finally said Sirzech's as he rested his head on his hand, realizing the conversation wasn't going anywhere if he didn't talk. Hiruzen clunkily and slowly, like a badly oiled machine, corrected his posture to what he tended to look like whenever he was having a serious conversation. Fingers intertwined, hands before his face and elbows resting over his desk. Explain. This is for Naruto's sake. Keep explaining. The clan leaders have surely already begun connecting Naruto's presence to my own. My actions and status may reflect on how they will view him from now on. I may be exaggerating, but I intend to deal with any such possibility if it's within my power. After all, I have just killed one of your most influential ninja on the first day they meet me and therefore caused lots of trouble. You raise a good point. But I'm clearly aware of their abilities and I'm gonna bet you yourself are sufficiently aware too. Yeah, obviously. They still grasped what was needed to understand the situation swiftly and acted upon it without bias or the intervention of personal feelings. I thought half looked at me as if they were ready to pounce at my neck, but they were just keeping their guard up. More than angered, they were alert. Fugaku may have received it head-on, but I'm sure most of them didn't properly perceive you moving back when you suddenly appeared in front of Fugaku. They were all trying to gauge your speed even as you assassinated Fugaku. I would have expected them to be more surprised rather than trying to seize me up when something like that was happening. Normally, but we didn't have the dulled senses that come with a nice period of peace. The tense situation with the Uchiha had everyone in a very jumpy state, so they were all pretty on edge. The Hokage sighed as if he disliked to admit something good may have come up from the conflict with the Uchiha. They instantly tried to seize me up as an enemy the moment I seemed powerful. Scary. Not like you seemed to care. They kept quiet after that for a short while. Like there was nothing more to say, even in this strange atmosphere, but it seemed there were still some things that needed to be said aloud. Hiruzen. Sarutobi threw a tired look in the man's direction, and his eyes widened as he saw him produce 3 packages of some kind that he hadn't been holding onto a second ago. Ifs. Just take them. Sarutobi took the packages, with a face of suspicion, and slowly unwrapped the first one that he had chosen randomly. It was a set of expensive-looking china with a very complex series of designs made of blue, light blue and green paint. Am I so easy to read? You didn't whip the tea off, so the extra napkins may have been unnecessary. Though the way things unfolded, I would have given you the gift a bit too late to whip it all off properly. Sarutobi put the piece of china to the side and grabbed the next present. This was bigger than the previous one, was warm, and the wrapping looked like what you would use for food. He opened it a bit with wariness before his eyes were filled with a brilliance like a child's. Sardine fish balls. One of your favorite foods. It has come to my attention that you have been quite lax with your nutrition these few days, so as a sign of my at least stop munching for a second and hear me out. Sirzech's lightly chuckled as he realized the old man was indulging too much into his gift. The Hokage reined himself in a few minutes after, some of the fish balls still intact miraculously, and opened his third gift. It was a strange small cylinder of some material with a cover on top. He opened it and a sticky, creamy and pale substance was inside. Rub that on your body where it hurts and it will help you with it. You may get someone to massage the areas with the cream or just apply it in those places and take a good nap or use it so that it hurts less so you can keep a better poker face on as you lie to your subordinates as they come to check on you. Is there something bad with that? Parents need to learn that spoiling their kids does them no good. As a parent, I want to use this useless and old body to take the burden off of my children if even for just a bit. The children also have an obligation to take such burden off of their parents and grant them deserved rest. Your children are capable, Hiruzen. Lean on their shoulders a bit more, I'm sure they would love that out of such a workaholic parent. They must be worried sick every day. As he said so, Sirzech's walked leisurely towards the window. I see that may be true. With a low creaking, Sirzech's opened the window just behind Hiruzen, the wind making his hair whip around. Take care of Naruto, Sirzech's. Fufu, don't worry. I already owe it to my sister and that kid. As those words lonely resounded in the room, the only things left were Hiruzen, the smell of sardine fish balls still somewhat warm, the strange odor of the medicinal cream, and the whipping wind coming out of the open window, the once vibrant red hair waving in the wind no longer there. Somewhere in Konoha, in a 2-story house. So yeah, these kids were dangerous. Not really from a physical point. Sirzech's was plenty aware he could deal with the 3 at the same time without much real effort. Rather, he began understanding why Hiruzen wanted them off the village and on another environment. Itachi was quiet and cold, to put it bluntly. That was only his outer self, and Sirzechs saw a socially alienated person with a permanent high guard and not much experience as far as relationships go. For a kid that shouldn't have entered puberty properly yet, that was a depressing description. The air around him wasn't hostile but certainly detached. It had become more welcoming after a bit, and Sirzechs only hoped he would further realize he didn't mean bad or anything to him. However, there was a discomfort to his posture, his expressions, his movements. His Sirzechs wasn't 100%, but it felt he disliked the mere fact of putting his guard up. No, wait, that sounded weird. Rather it was like he disliked the mere fact that he was getting ready for a fight. It wasn't uneasiness that sprouted from the possible result of such a fight. Sirzechs felt Itachi had realized that the demon vastly outclassed him, but from the thought of a fight itself. Hiruzen had said Itachi was an extreme pacifist at heart and deeply disliked any and all form of conflict, even if necessary, but he had finally grasped what the Hokage had been referring to. Anko was wilder, and she wasn't in the least restrained in her actions. It wasn't the haughty countenance of someone that put his chin high and tried to be head and shoulder above others, but a strong personality that kept pressure away. If she couldn't be overwhelmed, she was safe. In a world where everyone was an enemy, she couldn't yield and wouldn't bend her knee. Any offense would be taken seriously and furiously, like she was putting out a flame with a strong wind before it grew bigger. She likely realizes a not strong enough wind will only feed a flame, and a big enough flame will not care about an overwhelming wind. So was she banking on her only option and brute, forcing her way across all that negativity, aware that it might bite her in the butt in the future, or was she so cornered that she was forced to rely on her only safe card, even if there would be consequences? The two sounded the same, so let's put it another way. Was the forceful, direct and abrasive Anko the real Anko, or a very well done mask that had stuck to her face after so many years and now she herself wasn't fully aware what was real? Or was Sirzechs being naive, thinking such things? Hyuga, kind of like a different Itachi, but it was different. Itachi was detached and lonely, but Hyuga was just awkward and directly antisocial. Sirzechs had this funny feeling that hadn't he passed the last couple of hours conversing with him, she wouldn't have ever talked to him willingly. Or rather, recognized him. But Sirzechs felt a very weak force of presence, a stark contrast to someone like Anko, and then remembered her submissiveness against orders. Sirzechs had lived many centuries, and he could understand the human heart very well. It may have been a theory, but he felt he was in the right. For Hyuga, a sense of distance was formed between herself and others, a strange disconnected feeling, which along with her unusually low self-esteem, gave her a drive to strive towards pleasing others, finding a meaning or a bridge to shorten the space with other people. Humans are social creatures, they can't be alone. For her who, in her own eyes, had such a low value and didn't have the willpower to change that perceived value whether she was correct or incorrect by herself, her only option was other people. She certainly had the talents and something very akin to a control pad with very easily pressed buttons on top if you were observant and anyone could get his hands in it easy. That was likely the reason she was Anbu even with her personality. She may be young, but she was definitely a looker and that obviously helped too. Suo, a drawling voice said lazily as its owner sat in the table of some living room. There were two other people seated at each side of her. A black-haired boy at the left, a juvenile purple-haired girl at her right. Sande Mesama decided to let us on your care. And you are our caretaker and we need to go to some unknown land that we have the least bit of information on. We also get to be with Kushina's brat who has been treated like trash and we will get some special training out of whatever is the norm in that weird place of yours as some kind of compensation for our extended leave. So we get away from this place, we get to pass some time with the kid and we also get a free ticket to some new tricks. More or less. Assured Sirzechs at her questioning tone. The pair of surprisingly developed suddenly hugged his face as two arms wrapped around his head and lodged themselves firmly into place. When do we leave? She shrieked in happiness. MMMFPHFMHMGHF PFMGPHFMPF MMPFFHPMFG. Sirzechs was having a surprisingly difficult time breathing and tried pushing away Anko with a substantial amount of strength. In his slight desperation, however, his hand found itself gripping a very soft mound of flesh. MIYAAH. Stop that, Anko. Said the black-haired boy seriously. You already give us a bad image with your behavior on the village, don't make Sirzechs and regard us badly because of your bad jokes. Towards the light chiding, Anko turned her head slightly. She didn't stop pressing her in the troubled demon's face. WHAAAT. Don't interfere, Itachi. Compared to all those useless men in the village, Sirzechs sounds like such a great person. There's not many among the ninjas that have looks, and among those most are jerks. Others are weirdos, and most villagers aren't very good looking, and if they are also useless. I can't let such a good catch esken iyaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaaa expression of surprise. The completely silent Hyuga was stuttering more or less random sounds as her blushing face didn't dare look away. The trembling Anko tried to spot the reason for her sudden reaction and found the aforementioned redid, a very neutral expression on his face and his hand grasping her the same way as before, but this time skillful movements threatened to overcome her senses with pleasure. I'm sorry, but I'm currently married. Even though she isn't quite vocal about it, I don't think she would quite like the situation. That aside, he handled her with skillful movements and a hot breath escaped the teenager's mouth. Don't underestimate a married husband's technique. We deal with bigger demands and expectations than simple one-night standers. Minus 20 minutes later, the situation at the living room hadn't been much different than it had been 20 minutes before, except for 3 crucial differences. Anko was on the floor, writhing and momentarily spasming every other time. On her face was the expression called ahegao and out of her mouth sounds of muted pleasure and an inconceivable something else was uttered periodically. Sirzechs was in the very same chair and very close to the very same position he had been in before Anko glumped his face. For some reason, an aura that exclaimed "Don't underestimate adults" emanated endlessly as he smiled. Itachi had entered some sort of hyper-cautious mode and looked ready to jump out by the window if needed be or to defend himself. From what was he expecting to defend, only he knew. Hyuga was a trembling heap of meat and was behind Itachi, and the younger kid looked much stronger and compassed than the older girl behind her back. This situation extended for a while, with Anko spasming in the floor, Hyuga trembling like a rabbit, and Itachi looking like someone threw him too big a responsibility, having to deal with Sirzechs by himself. The man was immensely amused how his presence unsettled them all in such a funny way. This state of negotiations between Sirzechs and Itachi kept going for almost 3 hours. 30 minutes in, Sirzechs got Hyuga some books he thought she may like. She certainly did, so as to not force her to remain in there while being so tense. 2 hours in, Anko woke up from her stupor and apparently had forgotten whatever had happened to her, except that her body was really hot. By now Hyuga looked as if she had quickly acclimated and Anko simply laid with her in a nearby sofa reading. Itachi wouldn't blame Hyuga, but he wanted to squeeze Anko's neck till it was thinner than a senbon or not really. Unless he was in charge of anything that pertained towards human relations and their image, Itachi couldn't help but feel extremely uncomfortable, tense and paranoid. Hyuga and Anko just weren't the best partners when it came to human relations, a fact he was fearfully aware of. But with Itachi here and the other two a good distance away, things worked out perfectly for Sirzechs. Reason being, he wanted to talk to Itachi by himself without interruptions. And so they talked about Itachi himself, or as much as he dared, about his life in the village and some events on his life, about the village itself and his opinion on the many matters related to it, on his family. His brother, his mom, his dad. Yeah, there was the theme, the one that Sirzechs had been holding close to his chest and waited patiently for the precise moment where he felt it was the best to tell Itachi about it. And tell him he did, about the whole trial and all its happenings, but more for the sake of a background, so the escalation of events made sense enough till the moment of his dad's rant against his perceived fate and his thoughts on the rebellion, the village, his clan, and most importantly, his family. Itachi didn't utter a word through the totality of it. Sirzechs hadn't quite noticed when, but at some point he had stopped talking altogether and resorted to only listening with intent. An icy silence continued for long minutes, but to Sirzechs' honest surprise, Itachi's next words after his face lifted up enough that his expression could be clearly seen had been. "Naruto's supposed to be here, right? We had a good enough look at him that time in the Hokage's office. He's injured, we know, and we're sincerely worried. I would appreciate if you let us see him." All the while showing a very faint but obvious smile. Almost unconsciously, Itachi gave the nearby sofa a quick look almost directly after he finished talking. Sirzechs understood he didn't want those two having to worry about him. Not that the two hadn't realized anything, but they kept quiet and so did Sirzechs. If that was their decision, he was no one to deny it to them. Deciding that it was a good enough idea, he told Itachi he would take the three towards the room where Naruto was resting and the Uchiha called his two teammates to get moving and come along. The young Red Eyes was still as conflicted as he should have been, but Sirzechs didn't pray further. This was his business after all. He did, however, thought a certain little thing, a tinge of happiness accompanying it for some strange reason, as the conflicted and divided Itachi shouldn't have been a good thing. No matter what, kids are still kids. Such thoughts coming to mind from one of these kids that certainly didn't know happiness like they deserved to, it filled him with just the tiniest bit of happiness. He casually opened the door to Naruto's bedroom as these cheerful thoughts got him in a good mood before promptly smashing it closed again with such brutal force. The ninjas present would have marveled at how the door didn't break if they weren't presently looking thoroughly puzzled and just a little bit scared. "Nop," said the demon in a very unusual tone. "Eh? Nop noppity nop." Sirzechs asked Itachi frightfully. With mechanical stiffness, Sirzechs' head turned around towards them, smiling sweetly and reassuringly. It had quite the opposite effect. "Nop," he simply said. What nop?" asked Anko, failing to remain cool or at least act calm. The mechanically moving Sirzechs whirled his head around, looking towards the door he had just half almost broken, half slammed like a wrestler's head in a competition, and then whirled right back towards the three youngsters. "Nop. See, can we this time?" was Hyuga in a feeble voice, intending to inquire, "Can we ask exactly what is it?" But before she had finished, Sirzechs' smile grew just ever so slightly bigger. That was enough answer. Then Anko said, her face glued in an expression of strange anxiety as she couldn't keep her eyes off the redid smile, pointed uselessly into the hallway. "We will go," and the smiling demon only looked at her, his smile neither growing nor shrinking, it didn't even so much as tremble. It weirdly felt like he was giving them clearance to leave. "Then, we will go and yeah," said Itachi uselessly as the three young Anbu turned in a perfect 180 back down the hallway and aiming directly for the first floor's living room. As soon as they felt they were out of earshot, "Holy, I almost crapped myself in there. What's up with him?" protested Anko loudly, though not so loud Sirzechs may have heard. "That was strange," added Itachi, still visibly affected by the earlier incident. "It was like he was fearful. He seemed more scared about letting us in than determined." Well, if Itachi-kun says it, it's likely possible," said Hyuga somewhat scaredly. "Though, what may have happened anyway? It's suspicious I tell you," said Anko energetically as she raised a meaningful finger. "That's supposed to be the kid's room, right? Could something have happened to him?" "That may be the case, but at present it's likely we will not find out anything. Sirzechs wouldn't even let us near the door, so asking will likely be futile," Itachi said as he began analyzing the situation. Anko saying something may have happened to Naruto had made him unintentionally worried. "Well, the only chance would be, forcing our way through Sirzechs, so, we don't have man." "That's it. That's exactly it, Hyuga." Anko suddenly exploded joyfully, making the other girl jump. Anko began beaming in her direction. If it's true he's scared, he may be thinking way more about whatever is holed up inside that dubious room without one thought of us. I say we ambush his ass when he least expects it, and we might have a chance. Don't begin getting violent, Anko. Sirzechs' sweat dropped as he looked at his berserkly hyperactive female comrade. "You should be able to tell, it wouldn't mean a thing. Sirzechs and I haven't passed a day with a man, and I can tell we aren't even close to his level. Also, if it's true he killed my father yet he hasn't even a scratch," Itachi murmured the last part low enough that only he heard it. Hyuga looked hesitant to talk, but she forced some words out regardless. I want to see what's wrong with Naruto. Even if only for Kushina," she said with unusual conviction, which for the average person wasn't much really, but for Hyuga was a very big deal, greater than usual. Anko had a pondering look. "Oh yeah, now that I remember it, you were always very attached to the little squirt. After the kid got used to us, he tended to stick to you. He really was a natural, picking the most inoffensive little creature he could grab. Itachi always has the expression of a statue, and kid looked like he thought I was gonna eat him or something. Wasn't that cute, Hyuga-chan? The guy actually sticking so closely to you. And if we go by the fourth looks, you may need yourself quite a shiny goldmine in a few years' time." Anko made the sign of A-OK with her hand as a mysterious and dangerous light flickered from her hungry-looking eyes. "For Naruto, you say?" thought Itachi seriously, completely ignoring the tomato-red girl chasing the hyperactive second girl that dodged as she kept up her teasing. "Certainly. After the Kyuubi, we always saw Naruto's well-being as our concern, as a tribute to Kushina-sensei. I would be lying if I said whatever got Sirzechs so riled up concerns me, but you see it's not like he can blame us for trying to check Oops on his well-being arg." Anko tried to talk, pausing mid-sentence again and again as she dodged a rushing Hyuga that tried to grab her, with grace and style, almost like a bullfighter in a rodeo. She was playing around too much however, and as was expected, she got caught in the end. Itachi was still a tender 12-year-old, so the image of the visibly attractive Hyuga suddenly straddling the more frequently than not erotically looking she used an open jacket over a see-through chain shirt as casual wear. And what 16-year-old had that size? Anko was a sight to behold, you could say. He was the dispassionate type, but he was still a boy. Sudden surprise attacks like this were bound to have an effect, even if he was used to a pretty face like Hyuga's and Anko's curves crashing into his face for whatever reason, mostly an annoying joke on her part. Ra, what is it, Itachi Kun, do you fancy us in this kind of position naughty kid? If you keep growing like that, you will be no different than those crooked old bats villagers that stare at my every time we meet them for something. Though One-chan may not mind you joining and just try not to dirty Yuga too much, she may want to keep herself clean and good for her little nearer chwaaan. WWW, what are you spouting off by yourself? Anko D, don't listen to her, Itachi-kun, there's no way I would ever let Yobu, but I don't mind to say you maybe be bad or something. It's just that I'm not interested in yourself like that. Wait, that's not to say someone wouldn't be interested in you like that. There's nothing wrong with you, there really isn't. You're a prodigy that became Anbu captain at 12, your looks aren't bad at all, even if you're still a kid, even if you look cold, you're one of the nicest persons I have ever what are you making me say? Stop laughing, Ankuo. Looking at the mess in front of him, somehow Itachi's embarrassment seemed to seep off through his skin. Now that he thought of it, he really wanted to check Naruto, and he wouldn't mind giving it a shot now. He wanted to see him safe. That thought triggered something, and the whole idea of this trip, far away into some unknown place and for so long, finally hit him fully in the face. He wasn't scared or nervous, he didn't feel threatened or in danger, aside from his guilt at leaving his mother and brother by themselves for so long, and in the clan's present state. Even then, after talking to Sirzechs, hearing about his father, seeing these two goof around, and lastly processing this whole information in his head, he felt light. Relaxed. Peaceful. More than he had in years since being born, and he felt that wherever this new step in his life would lead him to, Itachi wouldn't regret one bit of it. He was looking forward to this, or so he felt. Of course, seeing these two idiots didn't just make him feel this way. Itachi couldn't help himself as he let out a deep sigh that emptied his lungs, filled with both exhaustion and resignation, thinking of whatever future would be delivered to him in the company of these two weirdos. Of course, he was a weirdo too, so this exasperation only grew. And there was Sirzechs and his people, Naruto himself. One thing was certain. For sure, this wacky and unpredictable future of his, it would be filled with lots of very strange things. And for some reason, that didn't sound too bad. Back on the very same hallway of Naruto's room, where a very strange-looking Sirzechs had stood guard in front of the door, lay the very same redid, knocked out on the floor. The three Anbu couldn't believe it, as the three had just dared and taken a shot at their only chance, which was Itachi's Sharingan. They didn't know how much did Sirzechs know, as to their eyes he was still a foreigner, but the one thing they understood is that anything else probably hadn't much of a chance. It was either the Sharingan or nothing. But then and if he doesn't know, maybe he has some mysterious technique. Something to ward off or even reban things like Jinjutsu. Things that could fool a Sharingan. And so they devised a plan and gave it a shot. Hyuga and Anko in a front assault, using the hallway's tight and narrow space as an advantage. They didn't know his styles, specialties, techniques, hidden abilities. Hell, they didn't even know if what they did was considered advanced to whatever powers they possessed in his home, and they were screwed if this was the case, it was the complete opposite. But incurring damage on them was out of the question, they understood the redid was not such a man, so they hoped to trap him in a complete physical assault where he would be forced to rely purely on his body. Hyuga had a specialty for taijutsu, and her kinjutsu, in particular, was superb. She luckily had a ninja 2 plus her skill, so the close walls wouldn't get in the way of her swings. Also, swinging around wasn't the only way to use a sword. Anko was slithery in tight spaces like a true snake, as expected of Orochimaru's disciple. Once she got truly close, it was near impossible to get her off you or to defend against her attacks that just found their way all around your body. Itachi stayed back and was the backbone of the whole plan. Very small suggestions, involuntary movements you wouldn't even notice, he was sending these to Sirzechs' brain as he fought. They were wary, which was why they chose to send Anko and Hyuga and make him fight, otherwise the chance he may notice the very small movements of his own body. Keep him distracted, experiment with the suggestions. Make sure he really can be affected by Jinjutsu. Itachi was the best by far at them, and his Sharingan could detect those exact involuntary movements, even as the redid was locked into confusing close combat with his two teammates. Results looked promising, Itachi set up for the real thing, and when he thought Sirzechs' guard was especially vulnerable, he activated his Jinjutsu and trapped the demon into one of his best techniques. Though, that very sinister laugh at the end even as his body fell and his knees crumbled defeated, his face had a very malicious laugh. It was unnerving, if not outright terrifying, and the three knew it was all related to what was beyond that door. A big I told you was coming later, they knew that much. But curiosity and Preoccupation and Anko had a bit too much of the former, made a tricky mixture, and they proceeded forward, ready for whatever horror lay beyond that door. And so, as the last dregs of consciousness slipped away from him into a world of dreams, Sirzechs thought amusedly as he heard the creak of a door, the complete silence that followed, and the unmistakable sound of a loud thud like a body squarely falling into the ground without resistance. No matter what, kids really will always be kids. This took ages. I'm sorry on the immense delay, even though this was a simple revamp for a normal chapter. Also, to those reading these author notes, the next chapter may take longer than expected. I won't honestly feel satisfied till I have properly redone the first chaps. Their level of quality was outrageous, so it was driving me crazy. I even screwed up with this chap, for those that may have seen it in previous weeks. So yeah, unlike the previous two, this one was more about aligning. After noticing the lack of sustenance to the previous chaps and that the whole affair with the Grimoires, how did Kushina end up here in the first place? The reasons why Sirzechs just got updated on his nephew that he didn't know even existed, yeah, those things. So, I redid this chap to raise overall quality, to show characters a bit more in character, relative to the approach we're taking with them. Hope we did a good work. One thing to note though. I'm not trying to make a vengeful Sirzechs or anything like that. Kushina is a big girl, and she died because she decided to stay in the village and shoulder a burden lying the Kyuubi. He can feel sad all he wants, but as a demon with a couple hundred years under his belt, I do think he has enough sense to not act like an idiot and blame Konoha. As for Naruto, well, that was a special case. Sirzechs was mad enough, believe me, he just didn't show it, since there was more to the whole deal than it might appear at first. He did make it pretty clear to Hiruzen, non-verbally or otherwise, that a second screw-up of this scale was not gonna end pretty. It is my inexperience that didn't let me think of the fact and show it more appropriately. Sorry for that. Also, with luck the next ones won't take nearly as much, and with very good luck the next chap will be released before New Year. Yeah, after so long, such a slow update speed sounds pathetic, but is as much as I can do. Apologies for my incompetence. So, to previous readers, hope that you like the new version and the updated chapters. The new readers that don't know what the hell I'm talking about, hope you're liking the story till now. Well then, see you all, until next time. Oh, and I'll also leave the old AN below, just so you have more or less a taste how were things before we began updating. It may prove very revealing. Somewhere in the village, a deep sigh. That was the deep sigh of a man that had gone through a tiring day, annoyingly trying to accomplish a futile goal that for some reason, felt as fulfilling as bashing his head against a spiked ball, though at the moment that may prove less difficult than this. Though he would be lying if he said he wasn't having fun, as just that Grafia was less strict if she saw him like this. Leaning on his wife's soft side in such a way may have provoked guilt in someone else, but he was all too used. Walking down the streets of Konoha, looking appropriately handsome and drawing attention as he usually did, Sirzechs walked, sure of where was he going. One of the many clans that inhabited this city village, Konoha, to deal with certain matters he wanted to talk about. A sizable number of the local female population had noted his presence since he had first taken a step outside. The reactions were what he expected, so no surprise there. Then there was the male population, with some jealous, some astounded, some awed, some with a very similar look to the females. Wait, what? Steering clear of certain parts of the street as he walked down, avoiding a very select part of the male population, Sirzechs shoot a look without thinking to his accompanying partner, maybe to distract himself a little. The blonde kid with a face made perfectly for a mischievous expression was no more, and a beautiful okay, he was a boy. Sirzechs knew that and he didn't need a reminder, but as he looked at him again, the minuscule remnant of surprise he had held since he had first seen his real appearance, betrayed his intent at remaining calm. A perfect face with white and breathtaking skin, like high-degree porcelain, yet it didn't look an unhealthy pale. His eyes had remained blue, but the shade had changed, and now it was a deep but somehow brilliant blue, almost supernatural, with long black eyelashes. Thin lips, perfectly rosy and looking soft like flower petals, and a red crimson hair, silky like the fabric that would belong in a king's garments, and so soft looking it provoked one to try and touch it. What the hell had happened? That was Sirzechs' honest answer to this discovery. Devils were creatures made for seduction, deception, manipulation, etc., and looks were one of their greatest tools. Even if that era had passed, mostly, that was still the truth. But Naruto's visage was unnatural, supernatural, otherworldly, like a custom-made statue. Was it the result of the mingling of two? The humans from here and the humans from his world were different, that they were. Did that contribute? No matter, the problem now was the garnered attention. The kid was donning a high-class black kimono, with flames designs at the edges. Sirzechs knew Minato's trademark coat, and he could say it wasn't the same. The flames had a mystique to their design, and the manner in which they were sewn was more refined, which angered Sirzechs. Why did Grafia need to do this? Along that shoulder-length Haircut Grafia gave everything a change, a bang furling between his eyes and cascading just a few centimeters over his mouth. He looked downright like a girl. A stupidly stunning, charming and cute girl. Did she want him to get kidnapped by some weird woman? Oh god, please let it be woman's. Don't let those mans from before be the only ones with different tastes. She wanted him prim and proper, as perfect as possible, for the meeting with the clan leaders. Appearance can make a strong impression, plus ultimately, Naruto would be the one to deal with them when he came back. As an extra, she taught him as much etiquette lessons as she possibly could, which ended up being quite a lot as the kid was intelligent. Maybe that's how he stayed alive 5 years. At least he had calmed down considering how he no longer looked close to bailing out on them. Though the first 3 days were tumultuous. 1 week since he had woken up and he had passed from wanting to scratch their faces off to learning proper etiquette willingly. In Sirzech's book, that was good progress. Nevertheless, there still was the scar. From when that ninja operative, that Anbu, had tried cutting his vocal cords. He could have easily killed him if he had cut just a bit deeper. He had wanted to relish the moment and torture a kid that was barely 5. Unconsciously looking at it quite intensely, Sirzech's remembered a bit too late how uncomfortable that made Naruto. As the small child awkwardly hid it away behind his hands, trying to look as small as he could, a jolt of guiltiness struck Sirzech's, but there was nothing more that could be done. Painfully, the two kept walking in silence. It was awkward and supremely unnerving, so after sighing lightly to let out the stress, Sirzech's extended a hopeful hand to the child, giving his most sincere smile. There was a moment's hesitation, but that small and soft hand finally grasped his own after a short while. He couldn't honestly give a rat's ass about the onlookers' stares, as he felt the certainly scared Naruto actually lean on him for support after all those days of sticking to Grayfia like a scared puppy. And that cemented the thought on his mind, even when it had been in his head since he had first arrived. He was gonna take care of him, protect him. Not because he was his nephew, because he was Kushina's son, because she was dead, or anything like that. He would protect him and give him a chance, the one he deserved as a living being. Whatever would happen, he would. I might have made a mistake. Thought Sirzech's aloud as he scratched his chin in a pondering way, looking at a simple house at the side of the street. This is obviously not a compound. Did Hiruzen get it wrong or did I do a mistake? Most likely one of the two, said a sudden voice with a tinge of annoyance to it, the tone of which Sirzech's found familiar. Turning around to face the source of the noise, he found himself facing, as expected, that peculiar ninja that he had seen at the council meeting. Because as you can see, this is my home and not a compound. If Sirzech's remembered, his name was You Must Be Shikaku Nara, the clan head. Sirzech's extended his hand with an amicable expression and tone of voice. My name is Sirzech's Gremory, Kushina's brother, I know. It would be difficult to forget you, after all that. Shikaku said absent-mindedly as he shook the redid's hand without much enthusiasm. Also, could you tone it down a bit? Requested Shikaku of Sirzech's, who obviously looked puzzled, not knowing what was the Nara referring to. Your mannerism I mean. From the way you carry yourself and that tone of voice I can see you may tend to talk like a not so stuck-up Hyuga, which isn't anything bad really, but it's just a huge eyesore. All that mannerism is far too troublesome, so could you drop it? Sirzech's expression of puzzlement quickly changed into one of amused understanding. Haha, that's so. Then I'll see to correct I'll change it a bit. Shikaku's face looked like he was about to say that's better before someone else's voice interrupted him. Don't be such an ass, Shikaku. Even if in an unexpected way, kid helped us out of a very tight situation. Don't eat too hard on our guest. Toza is right, Shikaku. The village may very well be used to the strange habits of the Nara, but don't force them onto Sirzech's-san when he has been with us for so little. You may give us bad reputation. Hanit, Choza, Inoichi. The kid doesn't look like he's troubled in the least, so I don't see any problems with it. Plus, he knows about the entire village enough already. There was no necessary catch-up to get used to the weirdness of this troublesome place. Shikaku retorted annoyingly to his companions Choza Akimichi and Inoichi Yamanaka, each step getting them a bit closer to the other pair. They were likely with Shikaku from the start but lagged behind due to something and had just caught up, reasoned Sirzech's in his head. Was it that obvious? Shikaku didn't even direct his gaze toward Sirzech's after he quietly questioned him. That you're already familiar with this place. Your sister, Kushina, spent years in this village and married the man that had been handed the most important position within it. You're also on close terms with the current holder of said position. It doesn't matter if none of us ever saw you. The fact is that you're far too connected to this place to not be a little aware. Sirzech's gave a little snort of amusement. As expected of the "don't even try," interrupted Shikaku all of a sudden. If you seize up my skill with such a uselessly easy riddle that even a 5-year-old should be able to do, it would be too troublesome. That's downright embarrassing. Don't be like that, Shikaku, or you will annoy the kid. Inoichi chided Shikaku with a tone just a bit strict and said man ignored him like this was a usual occurrence. Sorry about that, he said to Sirzech's sympathetically. He's the kind of man that would sleep 25 hours a day if his wife wasn't there to stop him. Not that he doesn't try regardless, once a week. Ahahaha, that's right, Inoichi. Bellowed the big Choza, whose whole body seemed to tumble very slightly from one side to the other, like his mighty belly dangled from side to side as the rest of his body was a slave to the movement, dragged around by the massive inertia. There was, in his hand, one of those small cups used for sake, while in his other was a small bottle. He smelled meagerly like alcohol. Did they go to some bar to pass the time before coming here? Whipped he is, that Shikaku. Isn't that right? He circled his massive arm around Shikaku's neck. Aren't you a cute pet? You're more whipped around than a disobedient bitch. Ahahaha. Grunting in displeasure as he unsuccessfully tried to be free from Choza's grip, the weary and annoyed expression in the Nara's face turned somberly dark in just a moment as a smile crossed his face. Isn't that right, Choza? Thinking about it, my dear wife, whipped as she's got me, decided to invite Tsume to our house later so they can talk. That rowdy woman is far too troublesome, so of course I was against, but my wife stood her ground. How about it? Wanna make the same jokes to those two? I'm sure Tsume would love that bitch commentary. The drunkenness in Choza was washed away in mere moments, and by the end of Shikaku's subtle threat, the gigantic man stood there completely sober. His slightly rosy cheeks had turned pale as the rest of his face, and his expression of cheerfulness became sour as a lemon. Shikaku, I can understand, but Tsume isn't even your wife, Choza-san. Sirzechs couldn't resist interjecting as he barely suppressed a smirk. He let out an exaggerated sigh. Hiruzen. First your boy Minato looks like the wife more than my sister, and now this. If things are really like this, I may come to think the women don't buy the toys for themselves. They aren't the ones on the bottom, that's for sure. Added Sirzechs playfully as he looked in mock concern to Choza's ass, with a face that asked, aren't you sore? Maybe we can get you a special cushion. Inoichi had to hold his stomach and forcibly shut his mouth. If the rolling on the ground was any guess, Shikaku cared less for subtlety. These two had expected the biggest of the four there present to suddenly get red on the face, either with anger, embarrassment, or both, get very violent about stopping this humiliation or rambling on and on trying to save face, only making it worse, as he so often did when cornered like this. To the two males who were his close acquaintances' surprise, however, a kind of guilty expression was what was in their companion's face. Like a child's, after he has been caught red-handed when he least expected it. Finally realizing the why, Inoichi and Shikaku lost themselves to the laughter. Shikaku wriggled in the ground like a worm, trying to contain and failing badly, his laughter that threatened to suffocate him. Inoichi was on his knees, clutching his hurting stomach in one hand, the other hand aimlessly floating and groping at the air, assuredly looking for some kind of support so that Inoichi may resume the use of his legs again. The next 10 minutes consisted of just this one scene, with very little change. After so much unrestrained laughing, Choza's expression had yet again changed, this time to a lost, hollow and devoid blank, like he had escaped reality. Inoichi and Shikaku had come dangerously close to suffocating a few times now. Even though the revelation of the ninja's apparent kinks had brought the demon some laughs, Choza's present expression brought almost equal guilt, so he ended up awkwardly waiting for the two laughing ninjas to regain their breathing. The awkwardness got increasingly less bearable, but neither of the two men looked close to stopping, or even like they wanted to. What interrupted this embarrassing scene from continuing any longer had been something the three ninjas had failed to register when they first appeared, an element Sirzechs above all should have remembered. A small head covered in vibrant and gleaming crimson hair bobbed up and down as it couldn't contain the fits of giggles that made his shoulders tremble. Just as Sirzechs had again become aware of his nephew's presence amidst the confusion of strange incident, he noticed the other three men do the same. Unlike him, however, they weren't aware the child had been there since the start. To them, it must have looked like he materialized out of thin air. Calming himself down just enough, having become aware of the stairs, Naruto balanced himself perfectly and bowed with practiced elegance, an unexpected beauty in his simple movements, and a calmness, obvious in his face, like his fears and traumas, were all but washed away into oblivion or crushed down by his own strong willpower. And in that, an icy sense of dread overtook Sirzechs. This calmness, this refinedness, this elegance, this composure, this kid was smart enough that it could be scary, and Grafia was a miracle woman. Sirzechs had discovered the many ways in which that title perfectly suited her over the years. But the past, that kind of stain can't be simply washed away, that sort of fear can't just be wrestled down, the desolation and despair of such a way of life weren't things meant to be so easily controlled and discarded. Maybe with time, but a week was far too short a measure of time. Sirzechs knew that well, for even devils were not an exception to this rule. The displeasure, indescribable, flooded him for the smallest of instants. It wasn't foreboding or prophetic, more like a painful realization. That brought a feeling, a premonition, something that Sirzechs didn't think, he just felt. That maybe, just maybe, Naruto wouldn't be dealing with any of his problems in any sort of peaceful or reasonable way. Almost fleetingly, Sirzechs also thought something else. This kind of setting, he would have quite liked it. Sirzechs-san. Snapping out of the strange stupor, a confused Sirzechs looked absent-mindedly towards Inoichi. He and Shikaku apparently knocked off their laughter overdose and Choza having forgotten his embarrassment, looking at him inquisitively as the blonde man switched between looking at him and looking at Naruto. Will I ask you if you could introduce us to actually, you looked kind of out of it. Are you alright? Why yeah, sorry. Sirzechs recovered full awareness and began smiling reassuringly, noticing Inoichi's worried look. I just got a bit lightheaded out of a sudden, but I'm not sick or anything. Please don't mind it. Regardless, he bent down a little and put his arm around Naruto's shoulders, nudging him to move just a bit more to the front. This is the reason I wanted to meet all of you in the first place. Oh ho, now that's a surprise. Choza exclaimed in excitement. We weren't aware that Kushina had an older brother, but now it turns out she also had a little sister. Sirzechs kept a smile on his face, but it had suddenly become a little more blank. Before his brain could properly process what Choza had said. Certainly, the resemblance is remarkable. Well, not completely, but you can note certain traits. She at least looks more like her sister than Sirzechs-san. Inoichi tried to take the child's face in more detail with an appraising look. Once again, but rather than his smile, Sirzechs could feel his whole expression turning just a bit more blank. Gee, please tell me she's not like her sister then. I can't say I disliked Kushina, but damn me if she wasn't a troublesome pain in the ass sometimes. No offense, Sirzechs-san. Now, his face looked downright bleak. A whistling, lonely wind could be heard lightly, and the sun, still high in the sky, bathed the grounds below into light and heat. A very fine weather. But still Sirzechs exhibited an expression that almost reminded one of someone smacked in the face with a piece of hardened ice. Oi, Sirzechs-san. Aren't you gonna introduce her? Shikaku said, looking annoyed. Inoichi and Choza looked puzzled. Naruto innocently peered a bit into his uncle's face as puzzled-looking as the ninjas. For a moment, the redid demon grasped his face with his open hand, taking in the information as best as he could. He had somehow forgotten, maybe having been overcome by that weird sensation, or that awkward atmosphere after publicly humiliating Choza had gotten him out of whack. He had forgotten his nephew at the moment had become a spectacular beauty, the kind that enchant people or gained a following almost like a cult with a wave of a hand and a sweet smile. It mattered not that he was a boy or that he had a member. Girls at his age normally weren't developed in any significant way yet, and unless he was fully naked, one would not notice the male member that just clashed with his effeminate face that should belong to the princess of some foreign tale. He had forgotten. In some amazing way, it simply had disappeared from his mind. Of course, another thought came to his mind just then. Shikaku wasn't reacting, not to this spectacle that had dazed a crowd, the same one that had been out for him. Ninjas and civilians weren't the same, but this same face had made a couple dozen persons hungry for blood into harmless sheep that looked oblivious about their very location. Were they immune? Wasn't this weird? Or did they? And so Sirzechs came to a conclusion. That they were on their guard, that they didn't want to show a reaction. It was easy to forget, but Sirzechs had still killed one of their most prominent ninja by far, in cold blood, and if Hiruzen told the truth, none of them had even perceived him moving or executing the attack, not fully at least. He was a foreigner and stranger, but there was no reason for aggression or unneeded tension, so the alert ninjas in front of him had tried to be as easygoing and natural as possible. In front of this strange element, Naruto, that they had felt had a strange effect on him. Of course, they weren't aware. Even Sirzechs was unsure what caused this. They didn't want to be seen with their guard down or taken by surprise. That moment when Sirzechs had been on his own limbo, unaware of his surroundings, they must have gotten affected by Naruto the same way as the villagers. They just pulled themselves together far better, put on a front, and kept it together. Their pride as ninjas. Their instincts that told them not to yield. Their own desire not to do so. Not to shame their village. If Sirzechs was correct, he couldn't imagine the reason honestly. Oh well, at least it made the redid happy, knowing the stubborn monkey had something to be proud about in his dear children. Even about something so mundane, they looked ready to not back down. But even if Sirzechs didn't know he had only theorized this, he had been absolutely right. Even if he appeared to know the Hokage and he was really Kushina's brother, they couldn't just carefreely trust him. When Sirzechs had been acting weird for a moment was exactly when the Shikaku had finally realized Naruto's existence. The effect of his unnatural appearance was immediate, but since Sirzechs wasn't paying attention, they regained composure without him noticing. All this unnecessary thinking and dancing around the subject distracted Sirzechs from the really aggravating part of this whole subject. They thought that Naruto was Kushina's sister. Well, if nothing else, this would at least prove to be interesting. Again, somewhere in the village. I wonder if his wife will sue me for damages incurred to her husband. No wait, does that kind of system even exist in this place? Don't get sidetracked, Sirzechs. That's not the main problem here. Sirzechs muttered as he thought aloud about his recent meeting with the Shikaku. As was expected, the revelation about Naruto had been an unseen blow to the nuts, or to a certain degree it's what it looked like, going off their individual bodily reactions. There were a few moments of disbelief, and he repeated himself more than once easily, but when the news had properly sunk in, Choza had to be taken to the nearest medical center. Sirzechs had to pull Shikaku and Inoichi together by himself so that they could take him somewhere fast, as the giant and round ninja had suddenly dropped to the ground. At the start, Sirzechs had thought him knocked out cold, plainly struck by the realization. When he realized his body was lightly convulsing, he concluded he was having an actual seizure. Looks like Choza actually has had a few problems with high blood pressure in the past, and Sirzechs just rattled him off his hook a bit too much. Note taken, handle the revelation about Naruto's identity with a little more caution and precaution. Till the end of it all, both Nara and Yamanaka were left gaping or scratching their chins in doubtful disbelief. They took a considerable amount of time talking to Sirzechs about the theme, apparently very interested in one sense or another. Though Shikaku got fed up around 5 minutes later and wanted to leave. They even talked with Naruto himself, who kept his manners through the whole exchange, though talking had been reduced to simple hand signs and signals, since Naruto was still refusing to let anyone so much as put their hands near his scar. The two of them clearly noticed but kept quiet, something the redid devil was deeply thankful for. And as for Naruto himself, Sirzechs still felt slivers of that previous feeling, as he saw Naruto apparently enjoying himself, against all logical sense, that he should still be hiding behind his clothes, barely desiring to meet directly with other people. You're really intelligent, aren't you? Sirzechs said casually out of nowhere a few moments later, as they walked down another street, their destination being the Hyuga compound next. Naruto looked at him cluelessly, cutely tilting his head to one side. Don't try, I saw after all. That time when I accidentally humiliated Choza, that was sort of an adult joke. You still seem to get it. You also look deeply amused at their reactions after I told them who you really are, and that's without mentioning, of course, the way you casually dealt with their stares and continue chatting pleasantly. Don't act like you don't know here either, I saw your body stir lightly. Sirzechs wasn't making an accusation, as his tone was light and pleasant, or even comforting. This wasn't the attitude of a normal kid, this wasn't the way a normal kid would respond or act. If he was really so smart, he should understand. Again, this wasn't an accusation, because even if he had such nonsensical hopes about Naruto understanding what he meant by this, there was nothing that could be done, and there was nothing that he was supposed to do because Sirzechs himself didn't know what was this. He just felt like mentioning it, talk about it, make Naruto aware that he also was aware of whatever this was. This wasn't a gambler tossing a coin, for he had lived long enough. He was sure, he knew, that he had the experience to notice there was something off and not be incorrect. Again, this wasn't an accusation, so when Naruto simply resigned himself to putting a finger to his lips with a pondering expression on his face, Sirzechs said nothing at all and just smiled softly. The small giggle that came almost immediately after he turned forward was somewhat expected, but he didn't care. This wasn't anything bad, Sirzechs was sure of this. It wasn't a biased opinion because it was his own nephew, but his most impartial answer, that it wasn't something to be afraid of or seal away. He was already determined, and that determination wouldn't change. He would give Naruto a chance, the one he deserved. Inside the Hyuga compound, in a room specially designed for meetings, Hiashi Hyuga poured himself some tea as he meditated in quiet and peace, getting mentally ready for a meeting. A letter had been especially addressed to him, from the mystery redid that had claimed common blood with Kushina, a revelation that had shocked even the calm him. The chaos he had almost caused by the killing of Fugaku was a thing by itself, but Hiashi, good at reading the bodily language, didn't feel malice or more malevolent intentions in the individual. His rage at the treatment of his nephew was the real deal after all. But with his implied level of skill there was always a chance of him being capable enough to lie to his discerning eyes. As an apparent old friend or associate from the Hokage, Hiashi lets him have the benefit of the doubt, but he would be a naive fool to keep his guard down. A meeting like this was something he honestly really desired, a chance to talk to the mystery men face to face, nothing between them. As such, he has been waiting in the appointed room since 2 hours before his appointed arrival time, meditating, readying himself. "Dear, is the man you will meet today not still here?" asked a sweet-sounding voice from the slightly open door of the room. Izuki, no, unfortunately not yet. He probably got caught in an inopportune incident of some kind, replied Hiashi in his customary stern voice, though it was fairly more pleasant sounding when he talked to his wife, as some had noticed in the past. Seriously? Remember you promised to pass some time with Hinata, since you had some free time today. I hope you have not forgotten again, have you? said his wife, almost indirectly implying that he was trying to escape from the assignment, and the tone also hinted at this having happened before. Nonsense, you know I am incapable of such. Hiashi-sama. Interrupted a young woman voice that came from the same direction as Mizuki, which was from a young female Hyuga in humble clothing, probably something like a servant. Of course, the Hyuga would never accept the use of such a term, neither by outsiders or their own people, but the truth was that that was the overall position of all lesser branch Hyuga. A man by the name of Sirzechs has come to the compound requesting for you. He says he has an appointment. At last it seems. Let him pass and guide him to this room. Commanded Hiashi in the authoritative and stern tone one would have expected out of the Hyuga clan leader. Well, about that. Good evening, Hiashi-san. A peculiar and easily recognizable mane of cascading crimson appeared behind the Hyuga girl in humble clothing. It was an unnecessary detail, but Hiashi noted the moderately rosy cheeks of the servant girl. I'm deeply sorry for entering into your abode without your permission first, but time is of essence today, and I still have a sort of busy schedule. I'm also deeply sorry, Hiashi-sama. The servant girl bowed deeply into a dogiza. This man entered of his own volition, saying you wouldn't mind in the least. Even then, I tried to stop him, even going as far as trying to use a bit of force, but all of my attempts were easily thwarted, so I wanted to at least try and properly announce him. Trying to forcefully block entry to a guest and not being able to even properly carry it out, I'm deeply sorry for having shamed the Hyuga clan's honor. Don't mind it in the least. Sirzechs-san certainly has an appointment and I also don't actually mind, but I would like for something like this not to repeat itself in the future. Did I make myself clear enough? Even when he wasn't really raising his voice, Hiashi's voice could be heard loud and clear, and the heaviness of his voice wasn't restricting as much as it was commanding, like keeping soldiers in line. My deepest thanks, Hiashi-sama. I'll make sure such an incident does indeed not repeat itself. The bowing girl lifted herself to her feet, gave another little respectful bow, turned towards Mizuki, another little bow, towards Sirzechs, another one. Her head was hanging down quite a bit lower now, trying to hide her flushed face, and finally taking off down one of the hallways and disappearing at a corner. Such exemplary diligence. Commented Sirzechs as a bit of a compliment until a soft voice with a tone of small regret added a bit sullenly. If only this place's atmosphere wasn't so heavy and depressing. Are they diligent people or enslaved people? Mizuki? Hiashi angrily called out to her. Sirzechs decided to look to the source of the voice and found within his line of sight a very beautiful woman with a sort of dignified elegance to her bearing like a true noble, but without the haughtiness that was ever so common in those types of people. Even as her face displayed the displeasure her tone of voice had hinted at, he couldn't help feeling at peace and imbued with some sense of relaxation. The strict and upright, but also just Hiashi and the kindly and likely sweet, but also strong-willed Mizuki. If they were just as he thought, Sirzechs felt like they were one of those strange matches made on heaven. They balanced each other out perfectly. Mizuki, I believe I have no need to remind you this is supposed to be an important meeting between me and Sirzechs-san. I have no time to deal with your complaints about the way things are here, so I politely request of you that you drop the topic. It is unwelcoming of you to make such comments, much less in front of a guest. Hiashi's tone was level, and his voice didn't raise even a bit, but the clarity of his words had a finality that was absolute. Mizuki's face showed the smallest of grimaces before she bowed her head slightly. My apologies, Hiashi-sama. I let my tongue slip a bit too much. It's fine, Hiashi responded. But a guest is here, so I'd like to ask you to leave us alone now, Mizuki. Mizuki made a deeper bow and began getting up to leave, but a sudden hand in her shoulder stopped her from doing so. I'd like to politely deny that request to your wife, Hiashi-san. Sirzechs requested. I would feel more satisfied if I got to talk with the both of you. Hiashi was at a loss for words, not understanding the redid's intentions. Could I receive some kind of explanation as to why? He finally asked. Sirzechs smiled softly, and Hiashi saw that as a confirmation. Before starting, he nodded to Hiashi's side while looking at Mizuki, telling her to go seat alongside him. Mizuki looked to her husband, who said nothing, but she knew he was accepting. Understanding, she turned around to address the little figure at her side, which Hiashi hadn't noticed on account of the little figure remaining beside the woman and behind the room's door, outside of view. Anada, dear, your dad and I are gonna be a little busy for the next couple of minutes. I'm sorry that this is so out of the blue. Go play somewhere else, be a good kid and remember to behave, understood? Wait, you brought Hinata here, Mizuki? Of course, Mizuki replied, lightly indignated at her husband's tone. I know you very well, Hiashi, so unless I forced her on you before your meeting started, I assured myself you wouldn't clear some of your time for your daughter. You spend less and less time with her as it is already. As Mizuki complained to Hiashi, Sirzechs spared a quick look to the child he hadn't paid much attention to, even after he saw her a while ago. She had a face much like her mother, but sported a short-haired Haim cut that didn't even reach her chin, except for 2 fringes of hair that framed her face at either side, and her hair had a bluish tinge distinct from her mother's purplish one. The elegance of her mother wasn't much of a trait in her, but in its place the demon could feel an immaculate purity. Of course, innocence is normally a common trait in children, and even prim and proper apples can go bad, though with such parents, that may be difficult, so it didn't fully draw his attention. Perhaps she would have made for a perfect nun, those that attract and dazzle the masses with the brilliance of their being. She was bound to be eye-catching in the future to boot, just looking at her mother. And then it struck Sirzechs that this 5, perhaps 6-year-old girl was more or less Naruto's age. Although Naruto would likely understand the conversation in its entirety and act just as flawlessly undisturbed by this unfamiliar place as he did while in front of Shikaku's house and at the hospital, Sirzechs decided someone of his own age might make things more comfortable. He was still a 5-year-old child with not many good memories, if any at all. Wait, Mizuki-san. Could I perhaps request for your daughter to also remain in here? Eh? Mizuki almost yelped in pure surprise due to the very unorthodox request. Hiashi had raised an eyebrow, a weird expression on his face. Sirzechs raised and waved a hand around apologetically. Sorry. I worded that incorrectly. Rather, I wondered if you wouldn't mind for her to remain here, maybe playing with Naruto. I'm sure he would get bored listening to a couple of adults talking around, just as she would with nothing better. You brought Naruto Uzumaki along. Hiyashi's face disclosed his feelings of puzzlement. He likely couldn't understand what was the role of an infant in such a discussion. The purpose of this meeting, Sirzechs began explaining. And others I have already planned with the other clan heads, is no more and no less than for the benefit of that boy and nothing else. The thought that such a notion would seem more plausible if he were to accompany me around occurred to me some days back. However, as you may very well be aware of, Hiashi-san, my son hasn't gone through the best of life experiences, so now that he has a chance to get on with your child, who is about the same age as he, forgive me if it seems to me like a perfect opportunity for some social interaction. The Hyuga clan head couldn't help the look of displeasure on his face. Possibly, memories of Naruto's situation before all this mess came to his mind. You make a fair point, understood, I will allow it, but I would appreciate if they could be taken to some adjacent room with proper supervision. I still want to talk more with you, without distractions, if at all possible. Sirzechs lightly smiled. But of course. I also still want to indulge on some more pleasant chatting with you and your wife, Hiashi-san. The demon said pleasantly as he signaled to a small figure that was out of sight to come closer. A bit too lately did Sirzechs remember his nephew's effect on other people. Less because of the effects of his appearance by now, and more because this very same appearance belonged to the kid called Naruto, who only a bit more than a week ago looked the utter and complete opposite from his current image. When this youth of otherworldly presentation appeared before the Hyugas, the expected gasps of astonishment and stupefaction could be heard, and an icy silence fell before all present. Sirzechs understood, he realized. He had said Naruto no more than a couple of seconds ago, yet what stood before them was in the least like the Naruto the two likely knew. Nevertheless, Sirzechs had definitely said Naruto a bit before this child before them came forward. That this kid before them was all they could see and no other kid could be seen hurrying forward could only mean one thing, but Sirzechs understood that the Hyuga couldn't just accept the answer. Unless he himself said it out loud, it was possible they would stand there frozen all day. Sirzechs took a big mouthful of air, readying himself for what was coming next. -1 hour later, so drawled the tired voice of Hiashi Hyuga, making absolutely sure of what he heard one last time. He is a boy yet he looks like that. And you're telling me that he struggled with the words leaving his mouth. The appearance we all have gotten used to over the years is an illusion, maybe some kind of seal. Sirzechs sighed. Yeah, for the 100th time, that's what I said. Like I already told you, it's likely Hiruzen regarded this as something of utmost secrecy, so he must have used some sort of obscure but effective method to deal with those of the Hyuga and Uchiha clan, seeing how they can see through these kinds of things with their eyes. Well, I am no expert on the working of your techniques, so I may be wrong about this. Hiashi sighed as well. There's no need, you're pretty spot on. With someone like Shisui Uchiha and his reputed Genjutsu technique at his service, the idea is not far-fetched. Hiashi's then frowned, as if something bothered him. But, still that appearance is pretty surprising. Mizuki Hyuga managed something similar to a strained laugh. Her expression then became one of reminiscing. Considering how Kushina-san and Minato-san were lost minutes after Naruto-kun had been born, it's kind of unclear if they would have hidden Naruto-kun's striking image, but when I see him so clearly like this, it's kind of lonely to think that we knew so very little of Kushina after so long. Seeing Mizuki's bitter smile made Sirzechs want to ask a bit about his sister. Were you in Kushina clothes, Mizuki-san? The sudden question made Mizuki blink once. Clothes? No, nothing so intimate, never. Mizuki embarrassingly hid her face with one hand as she waved the other, though Sirzechs could see her pleased smile. It's true that we used to talk a fair deal back in the time, but Kushina was better friends with Makoto Ichiya. She was so pretty and had some kind of attracting aura. She was really pop. There's no need to lie, Mizuki-san. Eh? Mizuki's eye opened wide to this sudden surprise as Sirzechs sympathetically smiled. I'm not really up to date on all the information, but it wouldn't be wrong to say I know things. That idiot said something about being the first female Hokage and got teased to hell and back, and then her temperament kicked in, and she beat them all black and blue. Mizuki's eyes stayed wide in surprise before her face relaxed, and she herself wore a smile. As expected of her brother, should I say that? She giggled amusedly. However, you're slightly wrong. Kushina certainly kept some people away after those events, but she had such a vibrant personality and strength of character that some people inevitably got closer to her in time. Minato always attracted attention since he was always so capable, and Kushina finally began opening up later on, but that incident where he saved her from Kumagakure made their popularity skyrocket and the topic of their relationship even more. Mizuki kept her smiling expression before something that hadn't quite caught up suddenly did, and after gaping for a few seconds, she looked to her husband with an apologetic look. He certainly didn't look amused. Understanding the reason of this apparently catastrophic slip-up from Mizuki that Hiashi was getting angrier with by the second, Sirzechs couldn't help but lightly laugh. This caught the attention of both Hyuga. There's no need to panic. Sirzechs began explaining when he had stopped laughing. Didn't I already mention it just a while ago? I may miss some details, but I'm not blind to what has happened in the village in the years that my sister has lived here. That, certainly, also means the little incident regarding Kumo. We don't blame Konoha for this at all. The two Hyuga kept quite still, maybe stunned at their own forgetfulness, before breaths of relaxation issued from their tense bodies. If Sirzechs knew something as trivial as Kuchina's behavior in class, how wouldn't he know this? They chided themselves mentally. Sirzechs felt content with resuming his light laughing at their anxiety. All this comforting reminiscence of the past aside, isn't it time that we come back a bit to the original topic, Sirzechs-san? Aren't you short of time today? Hiashi advised the devil. That he had wasted about an hour of that time in such trivial discussions ashamed him quite a bit. Though that wasn't the complete truth, seeing how Sirzechs had managed to explain the majority of what he wanted to say alongside his attempts at calming down him and his wife shortly after their higher brain function stopped properly working. Sirzechs completely froze on the spot, his expression the same one he had a minute ago as he laughed but totally petrified. He had completely forgotten. Yes, please. The redid hung his head low, ashamed at his carelessness. As his wife consolingly stroked the grown man's head while saying there, Hiashi started to check what they had already covered. In resume, you want us to take an active stance regarding Naruto's treatment in the village, which also includes that of our own clans. You also want us to provide support and help if the situation ever comes when forces inside Konoha ever undertake harmful actions against a boy, whether through physical means or using their influence. And if I'm not mistaken, discussing with the merchants in our clan's area of influence due to the overpricing if not outright denial to sell to the boy if the information you have gleaned about his situation is correct enough. Mizuki had already stopped stroking Sirzechs' hair and he looked towards Hiashi with complete seriousness. After the Higashi had done talking, he nodded in confirmation. Those were indeed the terms he had asked for. Hiashi looked him straight in the eye for a couple of seconds. Finally, he drew a breath and, "No, Hiashi-san, it's not like that." But swiftly interrupted. Sirzechs didn't even wait for his reaction before continuing. This isn't favoritism of any kind. The first and second term, that about the public treatment he's given and the physical offenses, it's a valid one. As I have understood through information gathering and asking the Sandaime himself, the level of these incidents and treatment has already gone far past the level of simply ignoring him. Many villagers have very repeatedly undertaken active acts of aggression, many with the obvious aim of lethally, or even mortally, affecting my nephew's health. Regardless of who was the victim, that these depraved acts have repeated themselves so many times across the years and still there hasn't been a more proactive involvement by any of the village clans is something that can't be ignored so simply. Hiashi and Mizuki were speechless. It wasn't any grand or incredible reason, but something a bit more mundane and also extremely shameful. Even if they didn't just sit idly by as all these events happened, Sirzechs wasn't even negligibly wrong about their laxness regarding this issue, but even this truth wasn't what left them frozen. The foreigner, a stranger, someone they could only connect with a past friend that had passed more than a decade ago, was telling them in their own faces their screw-ups and mistakes. Someone unaffiliated to the village and its business was telling them what a crappy job they were doing. It was simply disgraceful. I can actually understand this point a bit, looking at the tense atmosphere that the affair with the Uchihas had put over the entire village, but now that the situation has been defused for the moment, you have no excuse, do you? Sirzechs sympathized with them without being unnecessarily soft. Hiashi frowned with eyes closed, his head hanging a bit low, not stopping a bit of Sirzechs' words as they were true. For the third term, the demon continued. I have noticed that the price on products has apparently steadily increased in the latest months. If you can remember those villagers from the council, you may be pleased to hear that we squeezed some information out of the imprisoned ones. Looks like the biggest merchants and the people with influence tried to take advantage of the unstable situation born out of the tense relations between the Uchiha and the rest of the village. I do not know how aware any of you had been of this, but with all your attention diverted to the Uchiha, these merchants capitalized on the people's fears and sold supplies at increasingly high values to get them ready for the coming storm. As you must be aware, Konoha has a market type of economy based on the free market model. Its economy is held up mostly due to the constant influx of money from the various jobs your ninjas take and the constant budget the Land of Fire provides for your services as soldiers. However, that's restricted almost exclusively to monetary gains, while most of your goods and services come from prospering merchants. These merchants were varied in their products, their quality and the supply they could give, but all the bigger fish competed against one another, so there was some equilibrium. In the last years, however, these same merchants appear to have allied with each other. Through their combined might, they had more or less the market controlled. This in itself isn't the main deal, but the situation of the village. Work hasn't been the same, and the number of assignments isn't the same either. The budget allocated to you as soldiers of the land has been into steadily declining since the war's end, and with tension so low, and the damages and losses incurred by the Nine Tails only made a barely manageable situation worse. Konoha is semi-dependent on the trade of these merchants, not to mention they are some of the main providers of assignments in the village. If open confrontation ever happened between the Uchiha and the rest of Konoha, they would be in perfect position to grab you by the literal balls. Your situation would be horrendous, and they could come swooping in like savior gods and lend a hand, only that would leave them with plenty a chance to grow their influence even more. There were a few moments of silence, in which Hiashi, yet to open his eyes, simply breathed. Mizuki couldn't take her eyes off of Sirzechs, and said redid patiently waited for the response he knew was coming. You've done your homework, asserted Hiashi, looking Sirzechs in the eye. 1 week is a long time, he replied while lightly smiling. Indeed. The Hyuga sighed. So, your argument, if I got it clear enough, is that no matter what, these choices aren't simple favoritism, but only showcase the surface of real problems that are already there and which we should have long ago addressed by our own hands. More or less, Sirzechs answered. The fact that all these matters are related to my nephew in one way or another is mere coincidence, though I would be completely lying if I said I'm not using them as excuses for you and the other clan heads to feel more inclined to help with them. These are mostly the things that Naruto wouldn't be able to deal with by himself. Sirzechs calmly explained further. Are you completely sure? If someone like you were to take the custody of the son of the Yellow Flash of Konoha and the red hot-blooded Habanero, I fail to see how he couldn't deal with these issues himself. A ninja can be quite persuasive as far as merchants go, and even a genin could make short work of simple villagers without killing them. Hiashi inquired further about the matter. The world filled with such pettiness and irrational hate isn't something healthy for a young boy. I am not simply forcing Naruto to come here without aim, but to come here to understand why he is here. As I have told Hiruzen, my sister chose to live in this place of her own volition, so she must have had a reason. In the place where he was born, the place where his mother lived and from where his father came. If there is something there that Kushina found, I want to give him the chance to look for it too. Staying here, permanently or momentarily, it doesn't matter. I want to see if he can gain something from it. At the end is his choice, with or without all these difficulties. But of course, as he has had enough difficulties for a lifetime or a few, I would very much like to get rid of them before they bud. Hiashi frowned his eyebrows as he began meditating his answer yet again. The silence was straining and uncomfortable, but Sirzechs' eyes didn't sway for even a second, and the body of the meditating Hiashi didn't so much as move. The only one that wasn't an immobile statue was Mizuki, who was mildly aggravated by the tense air. I accept. Hiashi finally declared. The points you make are clear and are reasonable. Even more, to get told by a stranger and chided for not taking care of my own home correctly enough, if something so humiliating couldn't get me to move, I would be no longer fit as the Hyuga head. I can't accept such a thing. This decision pleased Mizuki as she smiled pleasantly to her husband. Sirzechs also had a satisfied expression. With the prominent Hyuga family on his side of the deal, a lot could be achieved. Well, drawled Sirzechs as he got to his feet and stretched a little. This has been quite a pleasant conversation. I would love nothing more than to continue, but the sun is still up and I have some things I still need to do. I hope I'm not being rude. Hiashi, for the first time since the start of the reunion, revealed a very small, but still evident, smile. In the least, Sirzechs-san. You have been a very pleasant guest all around. The Hyuga head stood up too and extended a hand to Sirzechs. Just like Kushina, you are quite a peculiar but passionate and strong-willed person, Gremory Sirzechs-san. The demon revealed a more light-hearted and less restrained smile. And you weren't nearly as hard-headed or as stubborn as they say you are, Hiashi-san. It was also a pleasure. Sirzechs hadn't had time to properly see Mizuki gawk at him for his comment, but he had more than plenty enough for seeing her disbelieving face as her husband decided to heartily laugh at it. It's that so? Maybe you just knew how to keep yourself in my good side, Sirzechs-san. Your sister evidently possessed the same ability as you, even if her temperament wasn't nearly as good. You sure it wasn't because she was a hot eye? Sirzechs jokingly suggested as he wriggled his eyebrow. She was, Hiashi admitted in a split second, shocking his wife. All of a sudden, his face was much closer than a second before. But remember exactly in front of who you're talking to me. He said in a much more grave tone. Sirzechs had just clasped his hand over his mouth fast enough to restrain a laugh that almost escaped. But all was good and done. Having finished the business he had come here to do, Sirzechs got up, gave a respectful little bow, and made a beeline for the room's exit. Wait, Sirzechs-san, Mizuki called after him from behind. Sirzechs is good enough if you don't particularly mind. Sirzechs took the chance to mention something he had forgotten to say. Ah yes Sirzechs. Aren't you gonna take Naruto know that you're going out? Mizuki pointed to an adjacent room, from where the laughter of kids and the distinctive sound of toys could be heard. Sirzechs barely looked in the room's direction before turning around and seeing into Hiashi's and Mizuki's eyes. Are you sure? Do you really want me to? He asked amusedly as he nodded his head towards the room, and almost exactly on time an excited and energetic cry was met by a playful and happy laugh, Sirzechs smiling appraisingly at the two parents' expressions. That had been enough answer. In Yuzuka compound, I accept. Tsume exclaimed. What? Sirzechs asked dubiously, half dumbfounded. I said that I accept. Tsume reaffirmed her choice with an annoyed tone. Did I miss something? As if, pretty boy. Tsume snorted. I just saw the pros and cons and made a decision. Simple, right? Sirzechs looked conflicted. But I had asked that question 2 minutes ago. Sirzechs squinted his eyes hard as if a strong light was stabbing into them, concentrating hard on making sure that only 2 minutes had really passed. DCH, you sure yelp like a little pulp even though I'm accepting your terms. Frustrated with not knowing what to think, Sirzechs sighed as he reminisced about the latest events on his evening. After leaving behind the Hyuga compound, letting Naruto stay for the remainder of his meetings, feeling that to let him enjoy half a day of playing like a normal kid, instead of helping solidify his point of view and make the chances of swaying any of the clan heads better, was more important. But what struck him the hardest in the head was that moment of awkward indecisiveness in which Naruto and Hinata went to that room full of toys, Hinata obviously eager to play with someone her age. Naruto had just stood there frozen, unable to tell what was he supposed to do next. A child that did not understand the very idea of playing or what did he need to do so was downright depressing, almost infuriating. Sirzechs hadn't missed and sure as hell didn't imagine Mizuki's wet eyes as she tried to help Naruto out in figuring his way around. What was attacking and racking his brain was something unrelated, however. Long story short, Sirzechs found out Itachi liked Tsume's daughter, Haka in Yuzuka, and Grafia had suggested that maybe she could come along. Sirzechs was against that, not wanting to take an unknown girl on a 7-year-long trip with strangers and with no reason other than a crush, before Grafia reminded him the purpose of this trip was the kids, the 3 Anbu childs just as important as Naruto in her eyes, so it looked to Sirzechs. A relationship like that, plus their help, may make Itachi open up more and help him with his distancing from people. Sirzechs admitted reluctantly that it did indeed sound not too bad, but only under 2 conditions. That she was capable. He didn't want to bring luggage that would only serve as Itachi's emotional crutch, neither did he want someone that could be called that. Someone physically dependent on Itachi, on who Itachi would be emotionally dependent in turn, wasn't a good move. That Tsume accepted. This was the one that Sirzechs thought would make the very idea impossible, a notion proved wrong just a couple of seconds ago. That would be investigated a bit more in depth in just a second. As far as the first condition went, Sirzechs had no complaints. Hana was a total ace, or at least by average standards. Her pure combat prowess was high even among the furiously savage in Yuzuka, known for their aggressiveness in the battlefield. Even then, he could note a cool head that took information and used its brain, and a penchant for trying to turn things to her favor instead of brute forcing. Plus, she stood out as an in Yuzuka because, unlike most of the clan, she had 3 companion dogs. A properly trained combination of those dexterous and intelligent creatures alongside a perceptive and strong leader all around sounded solid and simple but effective, and he liked it. On the plus side, she was a veterinary, but with a glance Sirzechs thought she may have all around better talents as a healer than what she put effort for. Of course, he wasn't a master at chakra or an expert, but it was something. Now, about the second condition, can you really tell me there's not something else behind this opinion? Or rather, did you really tell me the why in the first place? Sirzechs searched for a logical answer somewhere. Zoom's expression told him she was at least thinking about it or just plain bluffing to play around with him. If I had to say for 2 reasons. Aha. Firstly, that wife of yours, Grafie or something. Sirzechs' eyes went a bit wide here. I crossed into her by the market area about 2 days ago and she told me the whole thing about considering my daughter for your little trip and the whole Uchiha boy fancying my daughter too. Zoom sort of lost interest in Sirzechs as she flipped off towards the skies. In your damn face, Fugaku. She turned to the redid again, as if nothing happened. And the second is simply because I believe this aligns with my interests and those of my clan. A slightly happier and pleased tone in Zoom's voice just after flipping Fugaku off in the afterlife was not lost to Sirzechs, but he intelligently chose to not point it out. He did stare at her for some rather long seconds, however. She also said some other things. Sirzechs' interest in Zoom's words skyrocketed in that very instant. Enlighten me. Zoom uttered a low chuckle, obviously enjoying this. Let's see for one, apparently we were all taken for bloody fools and your little nephew looks the complete opposite of what we believed and always did. If I go off of your wife's words alone, I may develop some weird homosexual tendencies if I ever take a good enough look at him when he gets older. That's more or less on point. Sirzechs' side. She wasn't bluffing. Zoom inquired with poorly concealed disbelief. Sirzechs began counting with his fingers. We had to take Choza to the hospital. Shikaku got bored in 5 minutes flat, but took like half an hour in deciding if we lied or not. I had to kick Inoichi more than a few times in the stomach any time he even looked at the kid. Hiashi and Mizuki kind of blacked out for a few seconds. Sirzechs squinted his eyes as he looked seriously at the number of fingers he had raised. He then looked to the empty air with a thinking face, before answering with a satisfied sigh, yeah, that's about it. Sirzechs' face then contorted in small worry. For today at least. Zoom grabbed her face with her hand. Maybe I really didn't think about my answer enough. That's what I told you. So, what else did she say? Yeah, aside from the Uchiha's prodigy unexpected romantic desires and your blood's apparently inherent supernatural hotness. Don't exaggerate so much. Snorted Sirzechs amusedly as he took a sip of his cup of tea. He had almost let it fall when Zoom had said yeah so easily and out of the blue, and he had barely rescued it. He had just remembered he was still grasping it and was hoping the tea was still hot enough. Something about you being a quick shot. Sirzechs had completely forgotten to even register his drink's hotness as he immediately spat it at amazing velocities. It hadn't been something graceful nor controlled, which was if you saw how much tea had spilled into his pants and the many drops around his mouth and falling down his chin, dropping into and ruining his pants even more. Quietly taking out a handkerchief out his back pocket and cleaning his wet mouth, a voice, barely louder than a whisper, addressed Zoom in a dreadfully blood-curdling tone. This will remain between us and never again will you ever mention anything related to this theme to anyone, ever. Not even me. Am I understood? The simple tone and the low voice wasn't anything threatening on its own and Sirzechs was even calmly smiling with an understanding and calm face, so why did Zoom's face move up and down as frantically as it did, so desperately trying to convey her understanding? Glad we could reach an understanding. Sirzechs pocketed his handkerchief as he resumed his more normal tone and that sense of dread that Zoom felt disappeared like air. Anything more you'd like to ask? Anything more? Then there's only one more answer. I can count on you to keep my daughter safe, right? But of course. Your daughter's safety is as important as mine or Naruto's. I will protect her myself if need be from any possible danger. As you may expect though, I will make sure she can deal with those same dangers herself in time. That's the whole point of training her, just as the others. For the powerful me, who looks close to the level of power of a cage if not higher, to train her or instruct her, there's no better chance for the next possible heir of our clan. That's the cons you were talking about, right? Some very sweet chance for your daughter has presented itself and you want to reap some benefits off of it. And due to some very strange custom or an ability of your clans, you have deemed me trustworthy enough that you are willing to take the risk. Wrong so far. Zoom's eyes had the look of distaste and unpleasantness. You and Shikaku, you people see through others like they are some kind of obvious book that you can just pick and read at your convenience. Her arms trembled. It gives me goosebumps every time. Sirzechs laughed, which made Zoom shoot him a look of contempt. All the while, the thought lingered in his head. Was there anything really dangerous about this whole thing? Something that could have grabbed Zoom's attention? There shouldn't be. Those kids are a handful, but dangerous is what they least are. Naruto isn't anything like that either, even if he may be a bit weird. Graphian either, then everything is him. Sirzechs had forgotten because those events had been best left forgotten. It wasn't because they were traumatic, but because each and every one of them had silently agreed that to never talk about that incident was the smart choice, the sensible choice. Yes, they were no danger. Sirzechs hadn't been wrong on this original analysis, what he was wrong about was not thinking things through, going a little deeper. It was true, indeed, that none of the members inhabiting that building he was calling home while staying at the village were dangerous. What he forgot to consider was if they were any kind of danger together. And as that incident's memory slowly surged to the surface once again, the answer was so obvious that Sirzechs felt stupid as he began reminiscing about that very chaotic day. Flashback. Even as he realized it wasn't the moment for such thoughts, Sirzechs wondered if the effects of those genjutsu things could be put on some pill and sold. That was one of the best naps he had had in a long time. As the sound of his popping bones when he tried to stretch a bit was the only thing he could hear in this seemingly deserted hallway, it seemed obvious to him that they had indeed opened the bedroom's door. He hadn't needed to do much more other than turn around, and surely there in the ground were two young ladies, with Itachi suspiciously just frozen on the spot. He wasn't covered in a layer of thick pearly ice, so he at least knew it hadn't been Graphia. The bedroom itself was as it had been when Sirzechs had suddenly smashed the door shut, unaware of what laid beyond as he naively guided the kids towards it. Looking beautiful even as she simply laid there, naked completely, only barely covered in certain areas by a thin and soft-looking sheet, Graphia was as stunning as always. Intriguingly, however, a small figure laid beside her. It wasn't his presence there what was intriguing, but the position in which he laid in the bed. A leg of his was surrounded in a tight embrace by Graphia's snow-white thighs, his left arm, apparently long enough to reach, descended down her slightly arched back and grasps her luscious ass with apparent iron grip. His other was earnestly holding one of her soft-looking, as he submerged his face into her other. Even Graphia's arms were tightly holding onto his small frame to her body. And so, one of life's greatest questions again assaulted Sirzechs' curiosity and understanding of the overlaying laws of the universe. Why, exactly, was it that this kind of erotically exciting situation was so common and happened with such frequency? In real life, in books, in games, in TV, in anime and in manga, at least as much as he could glean on his free time whenever he dwelled on those subjects. Was it an inherently human thing to do, or but Graphia was a demon and Naruto was a half? Ugh, what? Hearing the feeble groaning, Sirzechs' consciousness came back to the real world. Finally awake, Anko. Want me to give you a hand? He extended his hand kindly while snickering openly at her. She shot the extended hand a furious look like it had recently inflicted some sort of evil on her, before hanging her head down and reluctantly accepting it. Yeah. You win, we're sorry. We screwed up and we ended up chewing more than we could swallow, now stop rubbing it in with that damn smile of yours. She then glanced towards the bed again, before averting her flushed face away from that scene. Was this really necessary? Says the girl that was shoving her in my face some hours ago. Sirzechs rebuked her. Also, it's not my fault that some of our best healing techniques need full body contact. Although something of this magnitude wasn't needed for this level of injury. Graphia is taking this more seriously than I thought at first. Saying this absent-mindedly, he looked Anko with a closer eye, finding the young and aggressive girl already with some expertise in seduction techniques, reacting like this peculiar. Hey Anko, Sirzechs pointed his index finger at her. Are you a Shotokan? The room fell into complete silence in that instant, and even the sound of their breaths or the contracting of their lungs inside their chests seemed to stop. The seconds became an eternity, and time had become meaningless. Movement came back to this world, and the frozen image resumed its course. A blushing Anko looked desperately to the ground. A confused Sirzechs pointed a shaking finger at her. Why you do you really you, Ank? No. Never. Gua. Sirzechs' lungs burst with laughter. In a fit of hysterical desperation, Anko seized Sirzechs by the collar, slammed him into a wall, and pointed a kunai at his neck, yelling death threats and promising him she could neuter him herself. Sirzechs' laugh didn't come close to subsiding, which aggravated Anko to no end. Stop, please. Hey, Sirzechs, it isn't funny anymore, Sir Sirzechs, really. You already laughed enough, don't you? This is embarrassing, so stop it already. Anko was close to tears, but Sirzechs couldn't stop himself. He could only utter feeble mutters of the pain of his sides and the increasing lack of air in his lungs. He rolled so much he must have hit his face half a dozen times on some furniture or wall. So when Hyuga woke up and found this most awkward scene, Sirzechs howling in laughter as he rolled near a blushing and almost crying Anko, a frozen Itachi that didn't look like he was even breathing, and the singular scene inside the bedroom that had knocked her out cold in the first place, it was no surprise that her first reaction was to curl up into a ball and act like she hadn't seen anything at all. For now and forever. 1 hour later, don't mind it, Hyuga. Ninja or not being able to deal with such an image at 15 years of age is quite understandable. Sirzechs reassured the gloomy girl. He was sitting, cross-legged, in the bedroom's floor and facing the foot of the bed. Anko was sitting the same, her back to the erotic situation, the same as Hyuga, who was hugging her legs like a scared little girl. She nodded her head very slowly, her eyes visibly wet. Ahahaha, you all really are more like children than I. Sirzechs stopped talking, as cold metal meet flesh, and he realized that something sharp was pressing against his throat. It was Hyuga, whose face was shadowed even when the window curtains weren't drawn, and clear light filled the room, such that she looked like a demon. A tear-eyed demon with a quivering upper lip and flaming eyes filled with frustration. If a demon told you someone looked like a demon, you should take his word for it. 10 minutes later, Hyuga was calm again with Anko soothingly stroking her back. She gets like that when you pressure her to a certain point, Anko explained without putting much attention into the conversation. Sirzechs looked a bit disbelieving. Wasn't she so docile and obedient that it was off-putting? She is, Anko replied. But if she opens up to someone enough, she starts being a little more expressive. She doesn't get angry as much as most would, so when she snaps, it's a big deal. Opens up, isn't that a good thing? UKNOWS, Anko drawled while smiling mischievously. Hyuga can be pretty scary when she wants, so whether getting close to her is worth the risk, I'll leave that for you to decide. Anko? That's mean. Hyuga protested. Anko surely laughed and Hyuga protested yet more forcefully in return. Sirzechs only looked from the sides, taking in the view with calm eyes. But observing these two ladies that looked like sisters, he remembered who was missing in this and a question he had for Anko. How did this happen? He pointed with his thumb to the frozen Itachi, who hadn't even woken up yet. Hyuga stopped tugging at Anko's hair and her clothes and got off her, letting Anko sit straight up again. She was still laughing while Hyuga was pouting. That? Anko likewise pointed at Itachi while whipping tears off her eyes. Apparently it was a joke. Between Itachi and a friend of his named Shisui. Anko told Sirzechs the whole story. Itachi and Shisui had been arguing about a very stupid topic, as two close enough friends were prone to do no matter where and how. The discussion was about how some animals sleep while standing up. Shisui saw it as an advantage since the animal could easily go on the run if it woke up to some danger, while Itachi repeatedly wondered if it was really so simple and considered it stupid or irrelevant. And to resolve the whole deal, Shisui decided to use his KOTOAMATSUKAMI. The details of how it worked made Sirzechs visibly gape to hypnotize Sasuke and make him do the same thing. They then would test some things out and so how effective it could be, but something distracted Shisui and made the whole thing go wrong. After a few days in which either thought that no change had happened no Itachi, Shisui was alarmed to see Itachi, dozing off things at home, were draining him during that period, but somehow staying on his feet. Not saying anything and feigning ignorance, he waited till Itachi had actually fallen asleep while still standing. The surprised Shisui had some kind of weird epiphany at that point and made it so Itachi would instead end up frozen up any time he was scared witless or surprised enough. He tweaked it enough that it wouldn't happen in a battlefield no matter what, so there was no danger. Why? Anko yet again pointed to the frozen Itachi. Looking at him, Sirzechs couldn't suppress another laugh. That's why. Answered Anko. Nodding appreciatively, Sirzechs detected a small object in the floor near the bed that he missed earlier. He reached out for it. Wondering what was this about, Anko asked when he had come back clutching a small bottle that looked for holding pills. This is a special medication, produced in my home. Responded Sirzechs while scanning the bottle. These are pills used to boost the chakra usage and are made of very precise herbs, in calculated quantities, and produced under special conditions, so only a few certified medical institutes can legally make them. The boost work in very selective ways, so that one attribute, if we should call it that, gets boosted while the others are left intact. They maximize how much aid and extra power they can give in one dosage without dangerous side effects by concentrating in a sole thing. One type of elemental ninjutsu, jinjutsu, taijutsu if it uses chakra, medical healing, etc. There's even variations that make other attributes weaker in compensation for a stronger boost. Something about disrupting the natural flow of chakra in the body beyond what can be artificially done without affecting your other skills. It's nicknamed Demon's Incense due to a certain game's influence in our young and has since spread. Of course it wasn't chakra, but since he couldn't tell them, not yet anyway, that what his people used was called magic and it was markedly different to their ninjutsu, this was the best explanation. He also couldn't say the word Vidyagam. WOOOW. The two young ninjas looked odd. But to Sirzechs it didn't fit. Grafia was a terrific spellcaster, her healing techniques included. Naruto's injuries shouldn't warrant something like this. Maybe she had felt responsible for the kid since Sirzechs had left his safety in her hands. He wasn't the only one that had felt devastated by his sister's death, so from that point of view this wasn't so unbelievable. But any and all warm and cozy feelings that he could have had evaporated the very instant that he had the ingredients list in the back a closer look. With an immediate realization like a jolt of electricity had hit him, he noticed the numb tip of his fingers and his visible breath, cursing himself and wondering how had he not noticed sooner. The distracted Hyuga and Anko, who noticed his visible breath and came to the same realization about the sudden change of temperature, were roughly grabbed by the shoulder. Sirzech's expression was wild and alarmed, and even though he wasn't gripping enough that it hurt, he had sizable strength on his arm. Before they could even protest, Sirzech said. "Listen to me and listen carefully, because I'm not repeating twice." "Understood." As he warned them, he shot the bed and its surrounding a cautious look. "Is that frost under the bed? Not much time left." "Why yeah," mumbled Anko, while Hyuga, at her side, trembled. "I told you this is composed of very precise quantities of very special herbs. One of those special herbs in question is an ingredient that can further augment the solution's boosting abilities remarkably and without negative side effects if made correctly, except for special side effects that vary from individual to individual in a case-by-case scenario. These can go from the completely harmless to the hilariously stupid, to the mildly annoying to the potentially fatal, and even to the outright lethal, whether to you or those around you. Are you still following me?" he asked frantically, and two sets of heads nodded urgently. Crackle, the sound of swishing wing could be heard from the quickness with which Sirzech's head whipped around. That sound was unmistakable. "Right then," he continued addressing the frightened girls. "Graphia has a potentially fatal, bleeding into outright lethal one. It is that, when she sleeps, her chakra goes completely wild. She also gets extremely drowsy, and the easiness with which she falls asleep exponentially increases. I don't know how long she has been sleeping or why the hell it decided acting up 10 seconds after I saw that damned bottle. But it is obvious that the reaction is starting. So I need your help to get Naruto and Itachi. Cray-I-I-osh. Snop. Crack. Snap crackly. Well, fuck me." Sirzech swore as he reluctantly turned around to face whatever horror had sprouted out. A mass of ice tentacles, though with that thickness, bendable ice spears sounded more correct, had sprouted from under the bed and whipping around like they were alive and thinking, trashing the room as they did so. The room was big and Sirzech's, and the girls had gotten far away enough that it was safe. As their horror-struck eyes looked with dread to this monstrosity that was roaring somehow, the previously frozen Itachi had miraculously regained consciousness. The thing had gone suspiciously silent, and still the moment Itachi had begun stirring around. His positioning hadn't been the best, so when Itachi regained consciousness, the weird thing wasn't the first in his line of sight, and instead it was the horrified and unmoving bodies of his teammates and Sirzech's. "Eyes?" Itachi rubbed his sore eyes. "Guys, why are you a?" He raised dubious eyebrows at their state. "Hello?" "Hello." He waved a hand in their faces, fruitlessly. After his dizzy mind had stopped spinning, he noticed more clearly their gaze fixed on one spot. Promptly turning around to see what was the big deal and froze over again right after. Like a bird of prey that zeroed on its cornered victim, one of the tentacles elegantly wrapped around Itachi's head and lifted him up. Resuming its ear-splitting roar, it seemed to find an activity in testing Itachi for Ragdoll of the Year. Very helpful he was. The absurdity of that event awoke Anko up. "It is that thing roaring?" Hyuga still stuttered. If this was a movie, it would be a kaiju movie, like Godzilla vs King Kong or a very bad hentai, Sirzech thought aloud reminiscently. As Anko pored over an obviously self-made map that listed the location of various sweet shops while muttering it's mine alone the dango, it can't, the creature can't touch it, can't reach it, my precious, and Sirzech pondered on the possible title of that very bad hentai movie with pondering consciousness. Hyuga was the only one trying to find out how to get the hell out of there. She had hastily turned to Sirzech for advice or help. Anko was going crazy and out of it, Itachi wasn't in a position to help anybody, and Sirzech appeared like the only one aware of what may they be dealing with. He had the same idea, thought Hyuga, as she felt his familiar grip on her shoulder when she had turned. What came next wasn't what she had expected, however. "Be strong," he said as he looked into her eyes, faking a sorrowful expression. "Eh?" Sirzech made the best possible impression of the nice guy, pose little spark on the mouth and catching. Sound not included in the normal package that she had never thought somebody could replicate. "You and Anko both need to be strong. For me and for you. Eh?" Now even Anko had joined, as the direction of this was obvious. And now he let Hyuga's shoulder go and put himself on a starter running position. "Saya, nerds." And he started running so insanely fast that the floor under his feet cracked open and the window through which he jumped burst apart like it had been bombed. An indescribable cry that sounded like something like Astounded, befuddled, puzzled, somewhat scared, honestly slightly amused by that, furious, lost, confused and without knowing what to do, the two kunoichi looked blankly at each other as the frosty thing of destruction drew ever closer, alongside Itachi, who was not passing his ragdoll test. Anybody who lived nearby could have only mentioned the cries of horror and terror, the roar of some unspeakable beast beyond normal imagination, and a tuft of red hair, speeding off like a scurrying mouse hole, looking as pale as in the face as a spooked ghost. End of flashback. Oi Sirzechs oi, Sirzechs. Soom yelled in the redid's ear, waking him from his daydreaming. Dazed and surprised that he was so far gone in his memories that he had needed Soom to scream him awake, Sirzechs apologized for the inconveniences. So sorry. These have been difficult days. I must need some more sleep, so I better get going since, well lots of works. Well, see ya.